Poppy Playtime begins with a simple question that becomes more disturbing every time the story gives us another answer. What happened inside Playtime Co. on the day an entire factory full of people vanished? Only a small percentage of viewers are subscribed. So if you enjoy the video, hit the like button. It's free, and you can always change your mind. At first, the answer seems obvious. Something went wrong with the toys. Huggy escaped, employees died, the building was abandoned. And years later, one former worker returned to discover what remained. But by the end of Chapter 5, that version of the story is almost unrecognizable. The factory was never just a toy factory. The monsters were never simply machines that became alive. The children beneath the building were not there by accident. The prototype was not a random experiment hiding in the walls. Poppy was not merely the company's most famous doll. Even the voice that guided us through Playcare was part of a deception that had begun long before the player ever came back. The complete story is about grief turning into experimentation, experimentation turning into an industry, and an industry eventually creating victims intelligent enough to understand what had been done to them. It is about Elliot Ludwig trying to defeat death, Harley Sawyer learning how to turn living people into commercial assets, children being shaped into obedient toys, and Experiment 1006 deciding that if Playtime Co. had built a world out of suffering, then that world deserved to be torn apart. And yet that is still only half of it, because the prototype did not simply destroy Playtime Co. He inherited it. After the hour of joy, the factory did not become empty. It became a new society, one built from the creatures the company had made. Some followed the prototype, some feared him, some worshipped him, some hid from him, some tried to protect the children who remained. Others went mad from hunger, isolation, conditioning, or years of being trapped inside bodies that were never meant to exist. By the time the player returns, the factory is no longer a workplace. It is the ruins of one civilization and the territory of another. To understand chapters 1 through 5, we therefore cannot begin with the player walking through the front door. We have to go back to the man whose dream created the company in the first place. Elliot Ludwig. Long before the halls were stained with blood, Playtime Co. was presented as the creation of an idealist. Elliot Ludwig wanted to make toys that felt special, not disposable pieces of plastic, but companions children could love. The public version of his life became part of the company's mythology. A gifted inventor, a visionary businessman, a man who believed childhood imagination deserved to be protected. Playtime Co. was founded in 1930, and over the decades it grew into one of the most influential toy companies in its world. The company sold the image of happiness almost as aggressively as it sold toys. Bright colors, smiling mascots, catchy advertisements, and carefully manufactured nostalgia covered every part of the brand. But the private story behind Elliot was much darker. His family life deteriorated, his marriage ended, and most importantly, his daughter Poppy died. Chapter 5 finally gives this loss the weight that earlier chapters had only hinted at. Poppy was not simply a brand name that Elliot happened to choose. The living doll we know as Poppy is connected directly to Elliot's dead daughter, Poppy Ludwig. That makes the creation of the Poppy Playtime doll much more than a commercial breakthrough. It becomes the visible surface of Elliot's attempt to solve the one problem no amount of money, engineering, or imagination had been able to solve for him: death. The flowers matter because poppies were connected to the company's earliest experiments with restoration and reanimation. In Elliot's office, the Experiment 814 document describes an attempt involving a dead rat and a strange poppy-based gel. The rat does not successfully return to life, but Elliot does not interpret the failure as proof that the idea is impossible. He sees potential in the substance. That reaction tells us almost everything we need to know about the direction his grief was taking. A normal scientific failure might have ended the experiment. For Elliot, failure meant the method had not been perfected yet. The question was no longer whether death should be challenged. It was how, and somewhere between those early experiments and the living toys that would later fill the factory, Elliot crossed a line that changed the future of Playtime Co. forever. Chapter 5 introduces the most important missing piece of that period: Oliver. For years, the identity of Experiment 1006 was one of the biggest mysteries in Poppy Playtime. We knew the prototype was intelligent. We knew it could mimic voices. We knew it hated or opposed the company. We knew it had once been confined by Playtime Co. and was considered unusually dangerous. What we did not know was the human story underneath the number. The answer is Oliver, or Ollie. A recording in Chapter 5 captures Elliot speaking with Oliver after he has already been transformed into the prototype. Elliot tries to address him with the familiarity of a father speaking to a son. Oliver rejects it. The conversation reveals a wound far deeper than simple hatred for a scientist. Oliver believes that everything Elliot did to him was always about Poppy. He was not the destination. He was the test run. The prototype calls himself exactly that because, in his mind, Oliver is gone. Whatever relationship he once had with Elliot has been destroyed by the realization that his body, his pain, and his future were used to prove that Elliot could eventually restore the child he truly cared about. This gives Experiment 1006 a tragic origin that redefines nearly every later action. The prototype was not merely the first dangerous monster. He was one of the earliest proofs that a human mind could survive inside an artificial body. And once that proof existed, Poppy could follow. Poppy becomes Experiment 1007, the successful restoration of Poppy Ludwig into the doll that would become the face of the company. The exact science remains intentionally strange because Poppy Playtime has never reduced its experiments to ordinary robotics. Flesh, artificial materials, neurological preservation, poppy-derived substances, and what the company eventually calls restorative gel all overlap. These creatures are not animatronics with programming pretending to be alive. They contain genuine consciousness. They remember, they feel pain, they can love, they can hate, and they can understand what happened to them. That is what made Playtime Co.'s later experiments so monstrous. The company did not create machines that accidentally developed emotions. It learned how to place living minds into bodies designed as products. Elliot's goal appears to have begun as something personal: defeat death and bring back Poppy. The company that inherited the discovery found a much more profitable use for it. That shift is where Harley Sawyer enters the story. Sawyer is one of the most important people in the entire timeline because he transforms the impossible, science surrounding Poppy and the prototype, into a system. Before Chapter 4, the company's atrocities could sometimes feel scattered. One experiment here, a strange tape there, a missing child, a monster in a hallway. Sawyer reveals that these were not isolated accidents. They became part of an organized corporate program. The Bigger Bodies Initiative, Playtime Co., was facing problems. Profits were declining, experiments were failing, employees were seeing things they were never supposed to see. Human workers cost money, created legal risks, asked questions, and could expose secrets. Sawyer proposed a solution so grotesque that it could only make sense inside a company that had already normalized the impossible: replace workers with giant living toys. If the company could transform people into mascots, then those mascots could perform labor, provide security, entertain children, and potentially eliminate the cost and inconvenience of ordinary employees. The language of the plan is important. Sawyer does not think of the experiments as rescued people, he thinks of them as assets. A bigger body is valuable because it can do a job. That mindset spreads through the company. Once a living consciousness becomes a product, every moral boundary becomes easier to move. Pain becomes a technical problem. Memory becomes a behavior issue. Identity becomes something that can be conditioned away. A child is no longer a child if paperwork has already assigned that child to a future mascot. And Playtime Co. had access to children in enormous numbers because beneath the cheerful factory was Playcare. Publicly, Playcare could be presented as charitable, an orphanage, a place where children without families could live, learn, play, and perhaps be adopted. In reality, it also gave Playtime Co. a controlled population of test subjects. The game station, which becomes the center of Chapter 2, makes far more sense once we understand this. Its games were not merely attractions. They could measure children. Musical memory tested mental speed and recall. Wuggy tested reaction. Statues tested physical ability, timing, endurance, and problem-solving. Adults watched from observation rooms. Performance could be recorded. Children could be evaluated, and the results could help determine which subject was suitable for which experiment. The games looked like play because that was how Playtime Co. disguised almost everything. A prison looked like an orphanage. An assessment looked like entertainment. A surgical candidate looked like a child on a field trip, and a human being could eventually look like a toy. The Bigger Bodies Initiative produced some of the most recognizable creatures in the franchise. Boxy Boo, one of the earliest major successes, demonstrated that a huge living mascot could survive. Sawyer even discusses shaping Boxy's appetite toward human flesh, showing how quickly the project became useful not only for labor but for eliminating people who knew too much. Huggy Wuggy, Experiment 170, was considered one of the initiative's strongest outcomes. Huggy could serve as security. He was tall, fast, obedient under controlled conditions, and terrifying when threatened. Mommy Longlegs, Experiment 1222, was created from Marie Payne and placed in the game station where her attachment to children could be exploited. The company discovered that she behaved more warmly around the children than around staff, so they used that tendency as part of her role. CatNap, Experiment 1188, came from Theodore Grambell, a child whose relationship with the prototype would turn into religious devotion. Dewey the Doughman would later demonstrate another escalation entirely. 3 children combined into one experimental body. Yarnaby became a creature intentionally conditioned to make Harley Sawyer the center of its world. These were not random monsters built for horror. Each one was the result of someone deciding what a person could be turned into. And while Sawyer expanded the initiative, Experiment 1006 watched. The prototype possessed something the company feared more than physical strength: intelligence. He could plan, he could understand systems, he could communicate, he could imitate voices, he could manipulate people. And unlike the company's ideal bigger body, he was not interested in obedience. At some point, the prototype escaped confinement. The exact sequence of every early escape and recapture is complicated, but one event is especially important. Theodore Grambell encountered the prototype and formed a bond with him. Theodore would become CatNap to Theo. The prototype was not a monster. He was a savior. That belief survives transformation. CatNap does not merely cooperate with Experiment 1006 because he is afraid. He worships him. By Chapter 3, the prototype has become a god in CatNap's mind. That tells us something about the emotional world of the experiments before the hour of joy. Playtime Co. controlled their bodies. The prototype offered them a story in which that suffering had an enemy. The company had created them. The prototype told them who to blame, and eventually he gave them a day. August 8th, 1995. The Hour of Joy. The Hour of Joy is the point where every hidden system inside Playtime Co. turns against the people who built it. For years, employees had moved through the factory believing the mascots were under control. The experiments were locked behind doors, monitored through cameras, restrained when necessary, tested, punished, fed, and assigned roles. The company behaved as though intelligence could be engineered without creating agency. That assumption ended in a single coordinated massacre. Under the prototype's direction, the experiments attacked the factory's staff. Huggy Wuggy killed in the public areas. Mommy Longlegs turned the game station into a killing ground. CatNap participated from Playcare. Other creatures moved through different sections of the facility. What Chapter 3 finally shows us through the security footage is not an accident or a handful of escaped animals. It is an uprising. People run. Doors close. Toys attack from places where employees once believed they were safe. The cheerful architecture of Playtime Co. becomes a slaughterhouse almost instantly. And the name the toys give the event matters. The Hour of Joy. To the human victims, it is a massacre. To the experiments, it is liberation. That does not make every killing morally defensible. Poppy herself becomes horrified by how indiscriminate the violence was. Innocent workers died alongside the people responsible for experimentation. Employees who may have known nothing about the deeper laboratories were slaughtered because they happened to be inside the building. But from the prototype's perspective, the company itself was the enemy. The factory had reduced people to materials. Now its creations were doing the same thing to the workforce. This is one of the central moral tensions in Poppy Playtime. The toys are victims, but victimhood does not automatically make every action they take good. The prototype's rebellion begins from a legitimate horror and becomes its own system of control. That transformation happens after the Hour of Joy. The factory should have become free. Instead, freedom immediately created a new problem. What happens to hundreds of living experiments when the humans who maintain the facility are dead? Some of the toys need food. Some are mentally unstable. Some still remember pieces of human life. Some were conditioned to obey. Some were built to kill. Some are small and weak. Some are enormous. And all of them are trapped inside a sealed industrial complex full of corpses, machines, laboratories, and secrets. The prototype emerges as the dominant power. He is intelligent enough to organize, strong enough to inspire fear, old enough to understand the company better than most of the later experiments. And because he orchestrated the Hour of Joy, many toys already see him as the being who freed them. But he does not create a peaceful society. After the massacre, the experiments begin living under brutal conditions. Food becomes scarce. Larger toys consume smaller ones. Groups form around safe areas. Some creatures retreat into isolated territories. CatNap maintains worship of the prototype in Playcare. Mommy Longlegs remains around the game station. Other toys descend deeper into the facility. The prototype collects parts from fallen experiments and appears to incorporate pieces of others into his own evolving form. The children who remained in Playcare become another mystery. Chapter 5 makes clear that the prototype moved surviving orphans away from the upper areas and deeper into the labs. He tells Poppy that he sent them to what he considers a better place. Exactly what that means remains unresolved by the end of Chapter 5, but the fact that he repeatedly frames his actions through the idea of a better place connects directly to Oliver's past. That phrase is not random villain language. It is part of his identity. Oliver believed in a better place before he became the prototype. The idea survives the destruction of Ollie, but it becomes twisted through years of pain, isolation, experimentation, and rage. That is why the prototype is more interesting than a creature whose only goal is revenge. He does not think he is simply destroying things. He thinks he is building an alternative. The problem is that his alternative repeatedly treats other living beings as pieces in his plan, exactly like Playtime Co. did. That is the tragedy at the center of Experiment 1006. He hates the factory because it turned people into tools, yet he becomes increasingly willing to turn other experiments into tools. CatNap worships him. The prototype uses that devotion. Lily is isolated and manipulated. The prototype uses her. He steals voices. He creates false identities. He tricks Poppy. He tricks the player. He sabotages Safe Haven. He removes anyone who threatens his authority. The revolution creates another ruler. Poppy eventually recognizes this. Her relationship with the prototype is complicated because they are connected not only as early experiments, but through Elliot Ludwig. Poppy represents the person Elliot wanted to save. Oliver represents the person Elliot was willing to sacrifice in order to learn how. That imbalance is built into their relationship before either of them has a chance to choose it. At some point after the Hour of Joy, Poppy turns against the prototype's vision. The prototype responds by imprisoning her. This is where the beginning of Chapter 1 is actually prepared. Years pass. The factory is officially abandoned. The outside world knows Playtime Co. disappeared in catastrophe, but not the full truth. The building remains closed. Its secrets buried beneath cheerful branding and decaying walls. Then a former employee receives a package. The message claims that the people who disappeared are still inside. The package also includes a VHS tape and a drawing or image pointing toward the poppy flower. The instruction is simple enough to function like bait. Find the flower. The player returns, and this is the moment Poppy Playtime begins. Chapter 1, A Tight Squeeze, is much smaller than the chapters that follow, but nearly every major idea in the series is already present. The first thing that matters is the player's identity. We know the protagonist is a former Playtime Co. employee. We know they were absent during the Hour of Joy. That absence is enormously important because it is the reason they survived. The exact reason they were not present, and exactly what position they held, remains one of the long-running mysteries. The player also appears to carry guilt, or at least a complicated connection to the company. Later death messages and dialogue suggest that returning is not simply curiosity. Some characters recognize the player as part of the world that harmed them. Mommy Longlegs clearly associates the protagonist with the employees she hates. Poppy needs the player because they understand the factory and repeatedly survive situations that kill almost anyone else. But Chapter 1 does not explain any of this. It lets the building speak first. The lobby still looks like a place designed for children, except all the people are gone. A giant Huggy statue stands in the center. Posters still smile. Safety videos still play. The grab pack is introduced as ordinary workplace equipment, a pair of extendable hands used to manipulate objects, carry electricity, and reach distant mechanisms. This is an important part of the atmosphere because everything supernatural is surrounded by corporate normality. A giant blue mascot disappearing from a pedestal is terrifying. A giant blue mascot disappearing from a pedestal in a building where an instructional video is calmly explaining safety procedures is worse. The player restores power and notices Huggy is no longer where he was. From that moment onward, Chapter 1 turns the factory into a stalking ground. Huggy does not immediately attack. He appears at a distance. A blue arm disappears around a doorway. A shape can be seen watching. This behavior already tells us Huggy is not a wind-up toy following a simple routine. He understands space. He observes. He waits until the player is deeper inside. The player moves through Make a Friend. activates production machinery, and creates a toy to open the next security system. The entire sequence is a small demonstration of Playtime Co's industrial philosophy. Children saw finished products. Employees worked inside a system that could manufacture them continuously, but the biggest product in the building is hunting the person operating the machinery. Eventually, Huggy stops watching and attacks. The chase through the vents is the first time the franchise reveals what a bigger body really looks like when it abandons the friendly mascot pose. Huggy's limbs are too long for the spaces he moves through. His mouth opens into rows of teeth that could never belong on the plush character sold to children. His body twists through maintenance passages with animal speed. The player barely escapes. At the end of the chase, a crate is dropped onto Huggy. He falls into the depths of the factory. For years, the natural assumption was that Huggy had died. Chapter 5 finally proves otherwise. But in Chapter 1, his fall serves another purpose. The first apparent monster is removed, and the player is allowed to continue toward the room the package told them to find. The flower. Behind it is a hallway that feels completely different from the industrial areas before it. Messages warn the player to turn around. The atmosphere becomes increasingly personal, almost as though someone knows exactly what is about to happen. At the end is a glass case. Inside is Poppy Playtime, the doll that made Playtime Co. famous. The doll created from Elliot, Ludwig's daughter. The player opens the case, Poppy opens her eyes, and Chapter 1 ends with what initially seems like a rescue. In retrospect, it is the moment the central conflict of the series is released back into the factory. Because Poppy is not a helpless doll waiting for freedom. She has a plan. She has been trapped long enough to understand what the prototype has done, and she quickly realizes that the former employee who just survived Huggy Wuggy may be the one person capable of helping her reach him. Chapter 2, Fly in a Web, begins by changing Poppy's role almost immediately. She is no longer the object at the end of the mystery. She can move, speak, think, remember, and make decisions. At first, she seems grateful. The player opened her case, so Poppy offers a way out of the factory. The route leads through Elliot Ludwig's old office and toward the game station, where a train can supposedly carry the player back to safety. This early section quietly adds some of the most important historical evidence in the series. Inside Elliot's office, the company founder is presented through the polished mythology Playtime Co. wanted employees to remember. There are tributes to his success, references to the hardships in his life, and the image of an inventor who kept moving forward despite loss. But sitting among that corporate history is Experiment 814. The document is ugly because it reveals the scientific obsession beneath the inspirational story. A dead rat, poppy-based material, an attempt at reanimation, failure, continued interest. By Chapter 5, this experiment reads like the first visible rung on a ladder that eventually leads to Oliver, Poppy, the prototype, and the later Bigger Bodies initiative. In Chapter 2, however, the player does not yet have enough information to see the whole ladder. The story then moves toward the game station. Before the player can simply leave, Mommy Longlegs appears. Mommy is one of the first antagonists who speaks to the protagonist at length, and that alone makes her different from Huggy. Huggy behaves like a predator. Mommy behaves like someone who has spent years thinking about the people who hurt her. She grabs Poppy. She tears away part of the player's equipment. Then she proposes if the player completes the game station challenges, Mommy will provide pieces of the code needed to operate the train. If the player breaks the rules, she will kill them. The setup sounds theatrical, but for Mommy, this is not only entertainment. It recreates the structure of the place where she was imprisoned and used. The game station once tested children. Now one former employee is forced to become the test subject. This reversal is crucial to understanding Mommy Longlegs. Her human identity was Marie Payne. She was transformed into Experiment 1222, a giant elastic mascot based on the Mommy Longlegs toy. The company discovered that her behavior was significantly more positive around children, which made her useful in the game station. She could act as a host, guide, and living part of the environment. But her relationship with employees was much worse. That distinction survives the hour of joy. When Mommy sees the player, she does not see an innocent stranger wandering through a ruin. She sees Playtime Co. The first challenge is musical memory. The player must repeat increasingly complicated sequences while Bunzo Bunny descends from above. Fail, and Bunzo reaches the player. The colorful game becomes lethal because the safety systems and human supervision that once defined the attraction are gone. Mommy watches. She talks. She enjoys the anxiety. And when the player succeeds, the result is not simply progress through a puzzle. Mommy's behavior toward the other toys reveals the hierarchy that has emerged after the hour of joy. The creatures are hungry. Failure has consequences. The factory's old games have become survival rituals. The second challenge, Wuggy, places the player in a room surrounded by tunnels. Miniature Wuggies approach from different directions, and the player must use the grab pack to push them back. Again, the original attraction has been transformed. Children once played a controlled version. The former employee now faces living creatures. The game station is preserving the shape of childhood entertainment while every part of its purpose has decayed. Between these challenges, the player moves through back rooms and production spaces that reveal how artificial the cheerful public experience really was. Observation stations, maintenance corridors, rejected toys, and staff documents expose the machinery behind the performance. One rejected toy in particular becomes memorable. Brawn and other abandoned products are treated almost as industrial waste. Playtime Co. was a company built around the illusion that every toy was a friend, but behind the walls, unsuccessful products were discarded like mistakes. The same logic eventually applied to living experiments. Useful subjects received roles, failures disappeared. The third major challenge is Statues, where PJ Pug-a-Pillar hunts the player through a dark obstacle course. Movement is allowed only under specific conditions, turning another children's game into a predator test. But the ending of the course is blocked. The player realizes that following Mommy's rules will not actually lead to freedom, so they escape another way. Mommy calls it cheating. That reaction might seem childish, but it reveals how deeply her mind is trapped inside the logic of the game station. Rules are not neutral to her. The company once controlled children and experiments through games, instructions, schedules, rewards, and punishments. Mommy now controls the player using the same structure. When the player refuses the structure, Mommy loses control. The final game becomes hide and seek. There is no longer any pretense that the train code will be handed over calmly. Mommy hunts the protagonist through machinery and maintenance areas, stretching through openings, moving across walls and ceilings, and using a body that was designed to imitate a flexible toy. The chase ends near an industrial grinder. The player traps one of Mommy's arms. The machine pulls her in, and Mommy panics. Her final fear is not simply death. She is terrified that killing her will make the prototype claim her. That line is one of the first times the series makes Experiment 1006 feel like an active presence rather than an obscure laboratory number. Mommy knows what he does with dead toys. She knows he is nearby, and she does not want to become part of him. The grinder tears her body apart. Mommy dies. Then a long mechanical hand reaches from the darkness. The prototype takes what remains. This is the true first physical appearance of Experiment 1006 in the main chapters, although the player sees only a small piece of him. The scene reframes the entire chapter. Mommy was not the highest power in the factory. She was terrified of something else. The player returns to Poppy and frees her again. At this point, Poppy's personality begins to shift. She has watched the former employee survive Huggy, solve the factory's systems, complete the game station trials, and kill Mommy Longlegs. Whatever Poppy originally planned, she now understands that this person is far more capable than she expected. They board the train. The player enters the code. For a moment, it appears Chapter 2 will end with escape. Then Poppy changes the destination. She tells the player that terrible things happened in the factory. She has had time to think. She says they are too perfect to lose and that together they can set things right. This is the moment Poppy stops asking. She makes the decision for the player. It is one of the earliest signs that although Poppy opposes the prototype, she is not automatically a perfect moral opposite to him. She has a goal, and she is willing to take away the protagonist's immediate choice in order to pursue it. Before she can explain everything, communication is disrupted. The train accelerates. The player tries to stop it. It derails near a sign for Playcare. And Chapter 2 ends by sending us beneath the factory's public attractions and toward the place where the company kept the children. That descent is where Poppy Playtime stops being primarily a story about haunted mascots. Chapter 3 shows us the institution that manufactured them. Deep sleep begins after the crash. The player wakes in the wreckage and almost immediately encounters CatNap. CatNap does not kill them. Instead, he throws the protagonist deeper into the facility. That choice matters because CatNap is not hunting without purpose. He is managing an intruder inside territory that he believes belongs to the prototype. The player escapes a trash compactor and begins navigating maintenance tunnels. Then a telephone rings. On the other end is a childlike voice, Ollie. At the time Chapter 3 released, Ollie seemed like a new ally, someone hidden somewhere. In Playcare, who understood the facility and wanted to help Poppy, he speaks with urgency, gives directions, provides keys, and knows details the player would have no way to know. After Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, every one of these conversations becomes sinister. There is no innocent child guiding us. The prototype is speaking through Oliver's old identity. Experiment 1006 is using the voice of the person he once was. That is a very different kind of mimicry from simply copying someone else. When the prototype says he can imitate voices, it would be easy to imagine him stealing Ollie from a victim. Chapter 5 reveals that Ollie is personal. The voice is connected to Oliver, the identity Elliot's experiments destroyed. So when the player first answers that phone in Chapter 3, the prototype is not only manipulating them, he is resurrecting his own childhood as a mask. Ollie directs the player to Playcare. The enormous underground orphanage was created around Elliot Ludwig's belief that children matter to the company. Publicly, the rhetoric sounds compassionate. Playtime Co. owes everything to children, so giving abandoned children a home can be framed as a natural extension of the company's mission. But the architecture tells a second story. Playcare is not separated from the laboratories. It is connected to them. The children sleep, learn, play, and undergo evaluation inside a system designed by the same company that needs human subjects. The orphanage gives Playtime Co. access. The game station produces measurements. The laboratories produce experiments. It is not difficult to see the pipeline once all three locations are understood together. At the center of Chapter 3 is the gas production zone. This area produces the red smoke associated with CatNap. The player receives the Grab Pack 2.0 and new equipment, allowing deeper movement through Playcare. Ollie explains that restoring power from different sections will allow the player to redirect the gas and continue toward the prototype. This gives the chapter a structure. Enter each major area, survive whatever remains there, recover power, and slowly unlock the path deeper into the facility. But each area also reveals a different part of Playcare's collapse. Home Sweet Home is where the children once slept. It should be the safest place in the orphanage. Instead, it becomes one of the most psychologically hostile locations in the game. Red smoke fills sections of the building. Without protection, the player experiences hallucinations, images become distorted, voices become unreliable. The environment turns memory and fear into weapons. CatNap's power is therefore not simply physical. He controls territory through a substance that alters perception, and that connects directly to his role before the Hour of Joy. CatNap was designed as part of the Smiling Critters line associated with sleep. His bigger body form could release the red smoke, making him uniquely useful in a facility built around children and behavioral control. The company saw a function. Theodore Grambell experienced a transformation. The difference between those two perspectives is the tragedy of almost every experiment in Playtime Co. Home Sweet Home also begins revealing the human cost of the experiments in a more direct way. Beds remain empty. Recordings preserve voices of adults discussing children as though they are entries in a system. The bright language of Playcare becomes impossible to separate from the knowledge that some of those children were being selected for transformation. This is where the series' horror stops depending on surprise. By Chapter 3, we know the company was doing something terrible. The dread comes from seeing how ordinary the process was made to look. There were schedules, forms, tests, assigned staff, rooms built for specific procedures. Playtime Co. did not stumble into evil in one secret basement. It industrialized it. As the player moves through Playcare, another major threat appears in the school. Miss Delight. Miss Delight and her sisters were teacher toys used inside Playcare. After the Hour of Joy, the teachers were trapped in the school. Food disappeared. The sisters turned on one another. The surviving Miss Delight became a creature shaped as much by starvation as by experimentation. Her story is important because the prototype did not personally create every horror the player encounters after returning. Sometimes the Hour of Joy simply removed the systems keeping unstable creatures alive and left them to destroy each other. Miss Delight's weapon, her obsessive behavior, and the remnants of the school create a different type of horror from CatNap. CatNap is a devoted agent of the prototype. Miss Delight is the result of what happens when a closed world runs out of resources. The player eventually survives her pursuit and kills her. By this point, a pattern is becoming obvious. The protagonist rarely enters a region and simply passes through. Every major area contains a survivor of the old system. Every survivor has been changed by a decade of abandonment. And almost every encounter ends with another experiment dead. That pattern will later matter to the prototype. From his point of view, the former employee is cutting through creatures who survived Playtime Co. One by one, Huggy falls, Mommy dies, Miss Delight dies, CatNap will follow. By Chapter 4, the Doctor openly lists the bodies accumulating behind the player. The series is quietly asking whether the protagonist is liberating the factory or simply becoming the most efficient killer still inside it. The next crucial encounter in Chapter 3 is DogDay. DogDay is one of the smiling critters, but unlike CatNap, he did not submit to the prototype. When the player finds him, he has already been mutilated. His lower body is gone. He is suspended and helpless. Yet his mind is still clear enough to understand what CatNap has become and what the prototype represents. DogDay describes CatNap's devotion in religious terms. To CatNap, the prototype is his god. DogDay also recognizes the player as Poppy's ally, someone who may actually be able to oppose the system controlling Playcare. Then the smaller critters arrive. They crawl into DogDay's body. What follows is one of the cruelest transformations in the series because DogDay does not simply die. His body is taken from him while he is still conscious enough to resist. The player is forced to flee from what remains. This scene condenses the entire history of Playtime Co. into a few minutes. A living being is trapped in a body he cannot control. Other creatures use that body. His identity becomes irrelevant to what the body is made to do. That is what the company had already done to him in another form. Now the nightmare repeats itself without scientists. The player survives and continues toward CatNap. To understand the final confrontation, however, we need to understand Theodore Grambell. Theo was a child. The prototype became important to him before he became CatNap. Experiment 1006 had escaped, or at least gained enough freedom to interact with the boy, and Theo saw him as a protector. In one major incident, Theodore was badly injured while attempting to help the prototype. The company later transformed him into Experiment 1188. The result was CatNap. Sawyer considered Experiment 1188 an impressive success because Theodore's intelligence remained unusually intact. But the company did not erase his loyalty. If anything, transformation made it stronger. CatNap's shrine to the prototype shows how he sees his savior. The structure is assembled from bodies and parts, a grotesque religious monument built inside the ruins of the company. Where employees once displayed corporate mascots, CatNap displays Experiment 1006 as a divine figure. This is not metaphorical devotion. CatNap behaves like a priest. He punishes those who oppose the prototype. He controls Playcare. He uses red smoke to terrorize intruders, and when the prototype ultimately kills him, CatNap appears to accept it. That final moment is essential. The player fights CatNap using the systems around the gas production zone. Electricity burns him. His body is badly damaged. He appears defeated. Then the prototype's hand emerges. CatNap looks toward it. For a brief moment, he seems almost relieved. The hand impales him. The prototype takes him. CatNap's god does not rescue him. He harvests him. This is the clearest proof so far that devotion does not create safety under Experiment 1006. CatNap spent years serving the prototype. Yet when his usefulness ends, his body becomes material. The behavior mirrors Playtime Co. with uncomfortable precision, useful experiment, failed experiment, recover the parts. The player then redirects the red smoke and finally reunites with Poppy. And Poppy has something she has wanted the protagonist to see, a tape. The hour of joy. Until this point, the player understands that the factory suffered a catastrophe. Chapter 3 finally shows what happened. The footage is devastating precisely because it is not mythologized. There is no dramatic speech from the prototype, no heroic framing, no explanation while the violence occurs. We simply see different parts of the factory as the toys attack. Workers are caught off guard, bodies fall, the mascots Playtime Co. Created to entertain, guard, teach, or supervise become the instruments of its destruction? Poppy explains that the prototype ordered the massacre. She also makes clear why she opposes him. The people who deserved punishment were not the only people who died. The hour of joy killed indiscriminately. Poppy heard the suffering. She was trapped. She could do nothing. Her desire to kill the prototype is therefore not merely personal revenge for her imprisonment. She sees him as the creature who transformed a rebellion into mass murder and then built a new tyranny from what remained. This is the point where Poppy's plan and the player's journey become fully aligned, at least temporarily. They will descend. They will find the prototype. They will end what Playtime Co. created. Kissy Missy joins them. Kissy is one of the most emotionally important experiments because she repeatedly demonstrates behavior that is difficult to reduce to simple programming or hunger. She helps the player. She shows affection toward Poppy. She is cautious, frightened, and capable of restraint. Her relationship with Huggy Wuggy becomes even more important in Chapter 5, but for now, she functions as proof that a bigger body can survive the factory without becoming purely predatory. At the elevator, Kissy stays behind to operate the controls. Poppy and the player descend. Then they hear Kissy scream. Something attacks her above. Poppy immediately tries to reverse the elevator. The attempt fails. The player and Poppy continue downward, not knowing whether Kissy is alive. Chapter 3 ends on that uncertainty. And for the first time, the direction of the series becomes completely clear. Chapter 1 took us inside the factory. Chapter 2 took us below the public production areas. Chapter 3 took us through Playcare. Chapter 4 will descend into the prison and the infrastructure where the company kept the experiments. It could not allow the public to see. The deeper the player goes, the less Playtime Co. can hide behind toys. And the next person waiting below is the man who helped turn its crimes into a system. Harley Sawyer. Chapter 4, Safe Haven, begins with Poppy trying to reach Kissy. She sends the player deeper while she moves to help her friend. This separation leaves the protagonist vulnerable to the network of tunnels, industrial rooms, and containment areas beneath Playcare. The environment changes immediately. The upper factory was colorful. Playcare was built to look comforting. The lower regions feel like infrastructure stripped of the need to pretend. There are graves of toys, transport systems for bigger bodies, cells, observation rooms, heavy security. This is where Playtime Co. stored the consequences of its experiments. The player encounters an old train used to move captive experiments and eventually enters the prison complex. Then screens come alive. The doctor has been watching Harley Sawyer's fate is one of the most fitting punishments in the entire story. As a human, Sawyer treated consciousness as something he could manipulate and relocate. He converted children and employees into experimental bodies. He saw physical identity as material. Eventually, Playtime Co. did the same thing to him. After his failures and conflicts with leadership, Sawyer was transformed into Experiment 1354. The doctor, his biological brain became integrated into the facility's systems, allowing him to exist through cameras, monitors, security devices, and machinery. The man who turned people into infrastructure became infrastructure, but punishment did not make him kinder. Sawyer remains arrogant, cruel, and fascinated by control. When the player enters his territory, he does not simply try to kill them. He wants to observe. He treats the protagonist as another experiment. This is consistent with the human Sawyer we learn about through tapes and records. He is interested in outcomes. He pushes subjects. He creates dangerous situations and watches what survives. The prison gives him the perfect laboratory. And one of his most disturbing creations is Yarnaby. Yarnaby was Experiment 1166, a creature Sawyer deliberately conditioned around personal dependence. Sawyer wanted Yarnaby isolated. He wanted the experiment to know him as the center of its world. This was not companionship. It was engineered loyalty. The plan worked too well. Yarnaby's attachment to Sawyer becomes almost animal devotion. In Chapter 4, the doctor uses that loyalty against the player. Yarnaby's design reinforces the horror. His outer appearance can seem almost goofy at first, built around yarn and a wide mascot face. Then the mouth opens far beyond what the friendly design suggests, revealing the predator underneath the brand. That visual trick is essentially Playtime Co. in one creature. Friendly exterior, industrial cruelty inside. The player also encounters Pianosaurus, another experiment from Sawyer's program. Pianosaurus does not last long. Before the creature can kill the player, multiple elastic arms seize it and tear it apart. The savior steps from the shadows. Dewey the Dough Man. Dewey is immediately different from almost every major bigger body the player has met. He speaks with warmth. He jokes. He seems genuinely concerned about other toys. He knows Poppy. And he offers to guide the player to a place called Safe Haven. For the first time, the factory appears to contain a functioning refuge. Not territory controlled through fear, not a cult, not a laboratory, a community. That possibility changes the moral stakes of the story. If Safe Haven exists, then Poppy's plan to destroy the factory could kill innocent experiments who have done nothing except survive. Dewey understands this before the player does. He agrees that the prototype is dangerous. He understands why Poppy wants revenge, but he also sees the toys hiding in Safe Haven as family. To Dewey, destroying everything in order to kill one enemy is not liberation. It is another hour of joy. That disagreement will become catastrophic later. But before reaching Safe Haven, Chapter 4 forces the player through the Doctor's domain. Sawyer controls systems remotely, manipulates access, and repeatedly reminds the protagonist that escape is an illusion inside a facility he can see through countless eyes. The player has to break his control layer by layer. The Omni-Hand becomes central to the security systems. The Doctor's power is technological, not mystical. He dominates because the prison was built to dominate. As long as he controls the infrastructure, every door and camera becomes part of his body. That makes defeating him thematically different from defeating Mommy or CatNap. The player is not fighting a monster in one room. They are fighting the architecture of Playtime Co. itself. And once Sawyer's physical brain is finally exposed, the illusion of omnipotence disappears. Under the screens, speakers, threats, and surveillance is still a vulnerable piece of biological matter. The player destroys it. The Doctor appears to die, but Chapter 5 will later reveal that Sawyer planned for the possibility of his own destruction. There is a backup. Of course there is. A man obsessed with preserving consciousness would never trust a single copy of himself. With the Doctor apparently gone, the player finally reaches Safe Haven. The contrast is immediate. For most of the game, rooms full of living toys mean danger. Here, toys gather because they are trying to avoid it. They have built something resembling a home inside the corpse of Playtime Co. The exact scale of the community is easy to miss because the player reaches it after hours of being trained to expect betrayal from every moving mascot. But Safe Haven proves that the experiments are not doomed to become monsters simply because of what was done to them. They can cooperate. They can protect one another. They can form families. They can choose not to serve the prototype. Dewey is central to that community, and his ability to care for others is even more remarkable when we learn what he actually is. Experiment 1322 is not one child inside one body. Dewey contains 3. Jack Ayers, Kevin Barnes, Matthew Hallard. 3 human minds were combined into the Living Doe experiment. Each personality survives to some degree. Matthew is the stabilizing influence, the one trying to reason and lead. Jack carries a more vulnerable, emotional side. Kevin is volatile, angry, and capable of violent reactions. Under normal conditions, these personalities can coexist well enough for Dewey to function as a single person. Under extreme psychological stress, the boundaries begin to collapse. The company created a body that could stretch and reform. It also created an identity that could fracture under pressure. This becomes important because Poppy arrives at Safe Haven with a plan that places every one of Dewey's friends at risk. She wants to destroy the factory, not symbolically, physically. The idea is to use explosives and turn Playtime Co. into a tomb for the prototype. From Poppy's perspective, the logic is understandable. Experiment 1006 has survived every attempt at containment. He knows the factory. He manipulates other experiments. He can disappear into areas the player cannot reach. As long as the building remains his territory, he has an advantage. Destroy the territory, destroy the ruler. But Dewey immediately sees the cost. Safe Haven is full of survivors. The factory is terrible, but it is also the only world many of these creatures have ever known. Poppy is willing to sacrifice that world to guarantee the prototype's death. Dewey is not. This conflict would already be dangerous without outside interference. The prototype makes sure it becomes fatal. Throughout Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, Ollie has been guiding Poppy and the player. He has earned enough trust that instructions arriving through the phone are treated as help. That trust is exactly what Experiment 1006 needs. The prototype uses Ollie's voice to manipulate the player into interacting with Safe Haven's generator under false pretenses. At the same time, he draws Dewey away. The result is an explosion. Safe Haven is destroyed. The refuge dies in moments. Dewey returns to find the community he spent years protecting reduced to bodies and wreckage. This is his breaking point. Importantly, Dewey does not know the full deception yet. He sees a sequence that appears devastatingly simple. Poppy came with a plan that risked his family. The player arrived with her. The player manipulated the generator. Then everyone Dewey loved died. His 3 internal personalities react differently. Matthew tries to understand. Jack collapses into grief. Kevin demands someone to blame. The emotional balance that held Experiment 1322 together fails. Dewey transforms. His body expands into a monstrous shape, with the 3 personalities visually and vocally fighting for control. The boss fight is tragic because the player is not confronting a creature who secretly planned betrayal. Dewey wanted to help. He wanted to protect people. The prototype turned that goodness into a vulnerability. Dewey's physical weakness is cold. The player uses liquid nitrogen to freeze sections of his malleable body, then industrial machinery to damage him. Even after suffering massive injuries, he continues. Eventually, the player freezes him beneath a tunnel-boring machine and activates it. Dewey dies. His final moments are not triumphant. They are exhausted. He realizes how completely everything failed. He could not save Safe Haven. He could not control the rage inside himself. He attacked someone he had previously helped, and the apology he manages before death is one of the clearest reminders that the player is killing people, not boss designs. Poppy later confronts the player over what happened. Her reaction is angry because she also cared about Dewey, and because the plan has collapsed in ways she did not expect. Then she reaches for the one person she thinks can still explain what went wrong, Ollie, and the lie ends. The voice answers, but this time it no longer pretends to be an innocent child. The prototype reveals that Ollie has been him, the helper in Chapter 3, the voice giving directions, the person who knew where the keys were, the person who seemed to understand Playcare, the person who warned them, the person who guided them through critical systems. Experiment 1006 had been inside the plan from the beginning. Poppy is furious. The prototype is almost disappointed that she still does not understand him. This scene recontextualizes multiple chapters at once. The player thought they were descending toward the prototype. In reality, the prototype had been shaping the descent. He did not need to physically stand in every corridor. He needed the player to believe they were making independent progress. And the player was extremely useful. They killed creatures that might oppose him. They disrupted systems. They destroyed the doctor's active control. They helped create the conditions that eliminated Safe Haven. Even when the player acted against the prototype, the results could still benefit him. That is what makes Experiment 1006 a genuine puppet master rather than just the strongest monster. He thinks in consequences. He lets other people move pieces for him. At the very end of Chapter 4, the situation becomes even worse. Poppy and Kissy are separated from the player. The protagonist falls deeper, and Wuggy returns. The creature from Chapter 1 did not die when he fell. Years of speculation end with the blue face appearing again in the darkness. The first monster in Poppy Playtime becomes the bridge into Chapter 5. And this time, Huggy is not an introduction. He is a survivor. Chapter 5 is called Broken Things. The title applies to almost everyone in it. Huggy is broken. Poppy is emotionally and later physically damaged. Kissy has already lost part of herself. Lily Lovebraids is psychologically shattered. The prototype is a broken version of Oliver. Giblet and Chum are survivors of systems that mutilated or repurposed living toys. The player themselves will literally die and be restored. And beneath all of them is a company whose attempt to overcome death created generations of beings that cannot properly escape it. Broken Things begins with Huggy in pursuit. The player is now in the labs, much deeper than the areas visited in previous chapters. This matters because the labs are not merely another themed attraction. They contain the infrastructure closest to the origins of the experiments. The prototype's territory is here. The factory's deepest research is here. The player is no longer uncovering distant evidence of the program. They are walking through the place where its consequences still live. Huggy chases aggressively. He eventually manages to take the player's grab pack, stripping away equipment that had become almost an extension of the protagonist. The loss resets the power relationship. The player has survived multiple chapters, partly because they could manipulate Playtime Co. systems better than the creatures around them. Now even that advantage is taken. The player falls deeper and enters areas associated with recycling and reclamation. Here, Chapter 5 introduces the wrong side Outimals. The Outimals are grotesque, even by Playtime Co. standards, because they feel like creatures built from the wrong pieces. Their existence reflects the experimental nightmare continuing after the company's collapse. The deeper labs contain evidence that bodies and toy parts are still being altered, combined, damaged, and repurposed. The prototype did not end experimentation when he ended Playtime Co. He changed who controlled it. That point is vital. If the Hour of Joy was supposed to stop the company from treating living toys as material, why are the prototype's depths full of creatures being treated as material? Because Experiment 1006 has adopted the logic of the institution he hates. The people running the experiments changed. The worldview survived. The player, temporarily without a grab pack, encounters a small device called Globy, a star-shaped light source useful in the darkness of the labs. Then another survivor appears, Giblet. Giblet initially fits a role. Poppy Playtime has trained us to distrust the apparently friendly creature encountered in a hostile area, but he proves genuinely helpful. He rescues the player from an animal and begins explaining the situation below. Giblet is important because Chapter 5 needs a perspective outside Poppy's revenge and the prototype's control. Poppy has been focused on ending Experiment 1006. The prototype has been focused on controlling the factory and pursuing his own version of a better place. Giblet thinks in practical terms. Survive. Find what can actually hurt the prototype. Help the people who are still alive. He knows there is a master backup and that something stored within Playtime Co. Systems may contain the information or compound needed to neutralize Experiment 1006. For the first time, the plan is not simply to overpower the prototype or blow up everything around him. It is to understand what made him possible. That sends the player toward the oldest science in the factory. And as Chapter 5 progresses, the story finally brings the beginning and the present together. Poppy Gel, the prototype. Elliot, Oliver, the experiments, the goal of ending death. All of these threads turn out to belong to the same history. Giblet helps the player recover the ability to function inside the labs. A replacement grab pack can be found through the industrial sections, and the journey reveals creatures that do not fit neatly into the old hierarchy of hero and villain. Some residents of the lower facility are terrified of the prototype. Some cooperate because they have no alternative. Some have learned to survive by appearing useful to whichever power controls the corridor they happen to live in. That is where Chum Chompkins becomes important. Chum operates in a world where open rebellion can get a toy killed. His usefulness comes from moving between sides, surviving through performance, and understanding that the prototype's authority depends partly on everyone believing resistance is impossible. Giblet and Chum are not warriors in the same mold as Poppy. They are survivors who have had years to learn the social structure of the labs. Their existence is also proof that the prototype's kingdom is not unified. By Chapter 3, CatNap's devotion made it possible to imagine Experiment 1006 as the undisputed leader of the post-hour of joy toys. Chapter 5 destroys that simplicity. Plenty of creatures obey because they are frightened, cornered, conditioned, or waiting for a chance to escape. The Hour of Joy created freedom from Playtime Co. It did not create freedom from power. The player's new goal revolves around the master backup. Playtime Co. preserved knowledge because knowledge could become leverage. Procedures, formulas, methods, and records were too valuable to lose simply because one laboratory or one researcher disappeared. Among that information is a crucial concept, the negation compound. The science is deliberately presented in incomplete fragments, but the important idea is clear. The same field of research that can create or modify living experimental material may also contain a way to neutralize it. For years, the characters have been attacking the symptoms of Playtime Co's work, drop Huggy, grind Mommy, electrocute CatNap, destroy Sawyer's brain, freeze Dewey. The negation compound raises a different possibility: attack the process itself. If the prototype's unnatural persistence depends on restorative material, Poppy Gel, altered tissue, or related technology, then perhaps he can be made vulnerable rather than simply damaged. That makes the search for the backup more important than another weapon. It is the first plan based on understanding why the prototype survives, and Chapter 5 makes survival itself one of the central themes. The prototype tells Poppy that everything dies except them. That line only makes sense after the game reveals how deeply Elliot Ludwig's experiments were tied to mortality. Poppy and Oliver are not just two successful living toys. They are products of an earlier, more radical attempt to overcome death itself. Later, bigger bodies may be biologically durable, but they still starve, bleed, break, and die. Mommy can be ground apart. CatNap can be impaled. Dewey can be frozen and crushed. But Poppy and the prototype occupy a stranger category. Their creation is tied to the original dream. Not cheaper labor, not security, not entertainment, continuance, the refusal of death. That makes their sibling-like connection even more tragic. Elliot's greatest success produced two beings whose relationship is defined by the unequal reason they were made. Oliver was the proof. Poppy was the goal. The prototype can never forget that difference. The player finds a recording of Elliot and Oliver that finally confirms what the previous chapters had been circling. Elliot speaks to Oliver. Oliver rejects being called Ollie. He says Ollie is gone. He identifies himself as a prototype. The emotional meaning is devastating because Experiment 1006 is naming himself after his own disposability. A prototype is not the final product. It exists so mistakes can be discovered before the real version is made. Oliver believes that is exactly how Elliot saw him. Test the procedure on one child. Learn from the pain. Then use the knowledge to restore Poppy. Whether Elliot loved Oliver in some genuine way does not erase the fact that Oliver experienced the process as betrayal. And that experience explains why the prototype's hatred is mixed with attachment. Poppy is innocent of Elliot's decision. She did not choose for Oliver to become a test. She did not ask to die. She did not ask to be restored inside a doll. Yet to the prototype, her existence is proof of what was done to him. At the same time, she is one of the only beings who truly shares his condition. Everyone else dies. They persist. He resents her. He wants her near him. He punishes her. He refuses to simply destroy her. That contradiction is not a plot hole. It is the center of their relationship. The prototype does not behave toward Poppy like a normal enemy because she is not simply an enemy. She is family, evidence, rival, memory, and justification all at once. The more Chapter 5 reveals about Oliver, the more earlier choices become understandable. Why imprison Poppy instead of killing her? Because killing her would destroy one of the only beings who can understand what he is. Why imitate Ollie? Because Oliver is both dead and not dead. Why speak about a better place? Because that idea belongs to a human identity that still survives somewhere inside the monster. Why obsess over immortality? Because he was created through a father's refusal to accept death, then forced to live with the result. The prototype escaped mortality but not suffering. That may be the cruelest achievement in Playtime Co's history. As the player moves through the labs, Wuggy remains a threat. His return allows Chapter 5 to revisit the very first monster with 4 chapters of new context behind him. In Chapter 1, Huggy looked like the mystery. By Chapter 5, he looks like one victim among many. We now know he was Experiment 1170 and served as security. We know the Bigger Bodies Initiative valued his obedience. We know he participated in the Hour of Joy. We know his body survived the fall that appeared fatal years earlier in the story. What we still do not fully know is the human identity inside him. That uncertainty matters because Poppy Playtime increasingly asks us to remember that every familiar mascot name may hide a person whose original name has been erased. Wuggy is a product name. Experiment 1170 is a laboratory number. Neither tells us who he was. The same is true for Kissy, and Chapter 5 makes their relationship more emotional than ever. Huggy's behavior is not purely blind aggression in every scene. There are moments suggesting memory, recognition, and attachment beneath years of conditioning and violence. Kissy can reach him in a way the player cannot. That becomes crucial later, before the story reaches that point. However, the player is separated from the main route and enters Sweet Street. This is where Lovebraids takes control of the chapter. Lily is one of the most disturbing characters in the series because her horror is built around identity collapse. She appears like a doll with extraordinary prehensile hair, able to seize the player and move through her enormous dollhouse environment. She talks to objects. She imitates voices. She stages tea parties. She switches between childish excitement and violent possessiveness. At first, she can look like another experiment whose mind simply broke after years of isolation. The truth is worse. Lily Lovebraids is connected to Gracie Green, known through the conditioning material used on children. Gracie's image and voice were part of the system that taught orphans how they were expected to behave. Recorded lessons could be projected into rooms. Children were told what good behavior looked like. Punishment reinforced obedience. Conditioning prepared human subjects to accept toy identities. Imagine the psychological violence of that process. A child has a name, a history, preferences, memories, fear. Then adults place that child inside a controlled environment and repeatedly teach them that the desired identity is something else. You are not this frightened person. You are a good toy. Good toys obey. Good toys smile. Good toys do not resist. The cheerful educational tone makes it more disturbing, not less. And Gracie became one of the faces associated with that machinery. After the Hour of Joy, the power relationship reversed. The person who helped condition others eventually experienced transformation and conditioning herself. Lily lives inside an environment saturated with the same style of performance. She talks through characters. She reenacts domestic play. She polices behavior. She fears displeasing the prototype. Her mind has been folded into the kind of artificial role she once helped enforce on children. There is poetic punishment in that fate, but the game does not make it satisfying. Because the result is still another broken person. Lily is dangerous. She is also the product of prolonged isolation, manipulation, and identity damage. The player discovers skeletal human remains associated with her former life, a grotesque symbol of separation between the person she was and the body she now inhabits. She can be close to her own past without fully understanding it. That is the Nightmare Playtime Co. perfected. Not simply moving consciousness, breaking continuity, a person survives, but the connection to who they were can be damaged until the product name becomes stronger than the human name. Lily captures Poppy and Kissy. When the player is taken to her dollhouse, they discover that the two allies are already prisoners. Poppy apologizes. This moment is easy to overlook because the chapter quickly returns to escape, but it marks an important development in her relationship with the protagonist. Poppy admits she has manipulated the player. She apologizes for running. She apologizes for preventing the escape at the end of Chapter 2. She apologizes for the larger pattern of deciding what should happen without asking. That apology matters because Poppy has been moving dangerously close to the same logic she condemns in others. Elliot decided what Oliver's body was for. Playtime Co. decided what children would become. The prototype decides what his followers should sacrifice. Poppy decided the player was too useful to let leave. In Chapter 5, she is finally forced to confront the cost of treating allies as pieces. The player helps free Poppy and Kissy from the dollhouse, but Lily does not simply allow them to escape. She turns the environment into another game. The pattern should now feel familiar. Mommy Longlegs used games. Playcare used games. The company used games as assessments. Lily uses a red light, green light style pursuit built around her singing and silence. Playtime Co. trained its victims inside structures of play so thoroughly that even after the company is gone, trauma keeps recreating the same structures. Games are how people in this world learn control. The player survives Lily's rules and reaches higher levels of the dollhouse. For a moment, escape looks possible. Then Lily captures the group again and brings them to the tea party. The special guest is coming. The prototype in Chapter 5 finally brings Experiment 1006 fully into the room. For years, the prototype was a hand, a voice, a shadow, a possibility. Now he arrives as a complete figure. His form is mechanical, asymmetrical, assembled, and theatrical, with a jester-like head and a spider-like silhouette. Parts associated with other experiments are incorporated into or carried by his body, making him look less like a single manufactured mascot and more like the factory itself has learned to walk. This design is exactly right for what the prototype has become. Playtime co-created toys as clean commercial identities. Huggy is blue, Mommy is pink, CatNap has a defined mascot shape. The prototype refuses that simplicity. He is accumulation, scrap, borrowed pieces, stolen voices, human history buried under replacement parts. He is not one brand. He is what happens when the entire experiment program collapses into one survivor. Lily is thrilled by his arrival. Poppy is not. The conversation between them finally makes the conflict personal in a way previous chapters could only imply. The prototype speaks to Poppy with familiarity. He understands what she is. He knows their shared history. And when the subject of the missing children appears, he claims he sent them to a better place. Poppy does not trust the phrase. Neither should we. Better place could mean literal safety. It could mean another hidden facility. It could mean transformation. It could mean some form of altered existence. The game does not provide enough information by the end of Chapter 5 to declare the answer. That uncertainty should be preserved, because the missing orphans remain one of the largest unresolved questions in the story. What is certain is that the prototype thinks his actions can be justified through his own idea of salvation. That is exactly the kind of thinking that created Playtime Co. in the first place. Elliot wanted to defeat death. Sawyer wanted to save the company. Researchers wanted to improve bodies. Executives wanted efficiency. Everyone had a reason. The suffering came from believing the reason was large enough to erase consent. The prototype is now making the same mistake. He has a better place. Other people do not get to decide whether they want it. The tea party does not end with the prototype simply killing everyone. That restraint tells us more about him than a massacre would. Poppy challenges him over the children. The prototype answers in language that implies a terrible outcome, though the exact nature of what happened to every orphan is still deliberately obscured. Poppy calls him a monster. He responds not like someone hearing an unfamiliar insult, but like someone whose entire worldview has been rejected by the person he most wants to understand it. He says, in effect, that Poppy is broken and can be fixed. That word matters. Playtime Co. fixed children by conditioning them. Sawyer fixed corporate problems by turning people into labor. The prototype now talks about fixing Poppy. Everyone in this story who believes they can redesign another person eventually uses the language of improvement. Then the prototype grips Poppy. Her porcelain body is damaged. Part of her face is disfigured. Lily moves toward her and the prototype knocks Lily aside. That action shows the contradiction again. He hurts Poppy himself, but he will not casually allow someone else to take her. Possession and protection have become almost indistinguishable in his mind. The impact disrupts Lily's restraints. Kissy gets free. And Kissy attacks the prototype. This is a significant moment because Kissy is willing to confront the being that terrifies most of the factory in order to protect Poppy. The prototype retreats rather than allowing the situation to become a prolonged fight. That tells us another important truth. He is powerful, but not invincible. He chooses conditions carefully. He stalks, manipulates, isolates, and attacks when advantage is high. The image of a godlike prototype is partly a product of fear. He can be resisted. The problem is surviving long enough to do it. Poppy and Kissy escape the immediate confrontation, while the player still has to deal with Lily. Lily's response is pure possessive rage. The player came into her home, participated in her games, touched her things, then tried to leave. Her mind cannot accept the violation. She pursues the player through the upper parts of Sweet Street and the dollhouse structures, moving across decorative clouds and suspended scenery. The player uses the environment against her. A support is broken. Lily falls. The massive decorative structure above comes down and crushes her. Another experiment dies beneath the remnants of a place built to imitate childhood. It is a brutally appropriate end for a character whose identity had been trapped inside staged play. The player reunites with Giblet, Poppy, and Kissy. Poppy is alive, but the damage from the prototype is visible. There is no time to recover. The master backup is still the best chance to stop Experiment 1006, so the group continues toward the data center. This final stretch of Chapter 5 brings several long-running character arcs together. Huggy attacks again. The player flees toward the tram. Kissy is there. For most of the franchise, Huggy and Kissy have been treated visually as matching mascots. Blue and pink counterparts built around the same basic character concept, but the bigger body versions are living beings. And Chapter 5 finally allows that relationship to become more than merchandising symmetry. Kissy does not attack Huggy. She approaches him. Huggy begins to calm. For a brief moment, the violent security experiment from Chapter 1 is not behaving like a monster. He recognizes something. Maybe the relationship was deliberately engineered by Playtime Co. Maybe the two experiments formed a bond after transformation. Maybe fragments of earlier conditioning remain. Whatever the exact origin, the emotional result is clear. Kissy can reach him, and this may be one of the only moments in the entire series where Huggy chooses not to continue. Violence after already entering an aggressive state. That possibility lasts only seconds. The prototype arrives. He impales them both. The scene is devastating because Experiment 1006 destroys the exact thing his revolution was supposedly meant to create. Freedom for the toys to exist outside Playtime Co.'s control. Huggy has broken away from the prototype's side. Kissy has repeatedly chosen Poppy and the player. The two reconnect, the prototype eliminates them. This is no longer liberation, it is enforcement. The prototype cannot tolerate pieces moving outside the arrangement he has chosen, and the visual symbolism is difficult to miss. Huggy and Kissy were among Playtime Co.'s most iconic mascots. They survived the company. They survived the hour of joy. They survived years in the factory. Then, just as they display a moment of genuine connection independent of both company orders and prototype orders, Experiment 1006 strikes them down. Their exact final status is left with some ambiguity because this series has repeatedly shown that apparent death is not always final. Huggy survived Chapter 1. Kissy survived uncertainty after Chapter 3. But Chapter 5 presents their injuries as catastrophic, and the prototype later has access to their bodies. The safest way to describe the scene is that both are left apparently dead or mortally wounded. While the story has not completely closed every possibility, the player cannot stay. The prototype turns his attention toward the tram. Now the puppet master finally becomes a direct physical pursuer. This chase is different from earlier boss encounters because it proves that the prototype's terrifying reputation does not depend only on intelligence. He is unbelievably fast. His mechanical lower body allows him to move across walls and tunnels. He can keep pace with a train. He can attack through the cars. The player and allies use everything available to slow him. Electricity, fire, cold, Environmental hazards. The same categories of damage that killed other bigger bodies do not stop him permanently. This is where his connection to the older restorative research becomes impossible to ignore. The prototype has been consuming or using poppy gel. His body is not merely durable. It is maintained through technology meant to defeat normal biological limits. Giblet makes the desperate decision to crash the tram. The plan is simple because there are no elegant options left. If the train cannot outrun Experiment 1006, turn the vehicle itself into a weapon. The crash is enormous. The prototype survives again. Poppy and the player run toward the data center. They are close to the information that might actually neutralize him. Then the prototype catches them. He wounds the player severely. For the first time in the main narrative, the protagonist does not simply fail a chase and receive a non-canon death screen. Within the story itself, the player dies or reaches a state indistinguishable from death. And the prototype does something strange. He places the body into a vat of poppy gel. Then he takes Poppy. Why put the protagonist into the very substance associated with reanimation? There are several possible interpretations. Maybe the prototype wants the player alive for reasons we still do not understand. Maybe the act is deliberate experimentation. Maybe he knows the gel will alter the protagonist. Maybe he believes the player still has a role to play. Maybe throwing the body there is simply a cruel convenience. But the outcome is clear. The player does not remain dead. Inside the gel, consciousness returns through a surreal sequence of voices and memory. Poppy's words echo. The idea of returning years later because conscience finally became unbearable resurfaces. The phrase "welcome home" becomes especially loaded. The factory is a home only in the darkest possible sense. It is the place the player left, the place their guilt returns to, the place where people were remade. And now the protagonist has also been physically changed by its resurrection technology. A command appears. Get up. This phrase has followed the series through death screens and hidden message. In Chapter 5, it stops feeling like a game mechanic and becomes part of the story's obsession with refusing death. The player rises because death inside Playtime Co. is no longer reliable. Giblet reaches the protagonist and helps revive them. Poppy is gone. The prototype has taken her. Kissy and Huggy are gone from where they fell. The plan has failed in almost every immediate way. Yet the data center is still accessible. So the player continues. This is one of the defining traits of the protagonist. They do not win because they are stronger than every experiment. They win because they continue moving through consequences that should have stopped them. That persistence may be courage, it may be guilt, it may be conditioning. After the poppy gel, it may even be something biological. The game has not fully answered that question. Inside the data center, the master backup is activated. The player expects information that can help defeat the prototype. Instead, a familiar consciousness returns. Harley Sawyer. The Doctor's original active system was destroyed in Chapter 4, but his mind had been preserved as a backup. The ending is almost darkly comedic in its cruelty. The player spent an entire chapter escaping Sawyer's surveillance and ultimately destroying him. Then, while desperately searching for the one piece of information that can save Poppy and neutralize the prototype, they restore the Doctor themselves. Sawyer appears through the system. He recognizes the irony. And Chapter 5 ends, not with the prototype dead, not with Poppy rescued, not with the factory destroyed, but with one of Playtime Co.'s worst scientists alive again in digital form while the prototype carries Poppy deeper into the facility. That ending brings the story back to the question that began everything. Can death actually be defeated? Playtime Co. spent decades trying. The answer appears to be yes. But Poppy Playtime is not interested in treating immortality as a victory. Every example is horrifying. Poppy survives death, but loses her human life. Oliver survives transformation, but becomes the prototype. Sawyer survives his body, but becomes a machine intelligence haunting the infrastructure. The player survives a fatal wound through poppy gel. But we do not yet know what the resurrection has done. The company succeeded at preserving consciousness long before it learned how to preserve a person. That distinction explains the entire tragedy. Elliot wanted Poppy back. But what does back mean? Same memories, same voice, same soul, same relationships? Same body? If a child dies and wakes inside a doll decades later, has death been defeated? Or has suffering simply been extended beyond its natural end? Oliver answers that question through rage. He does not believe the procedure preserved Ollie. He says Ollie is gone. The prototype is what remains. That sentence may be the most important line in the mythology, because it tells us that biological continuation and personal survival are not necessarily the same thing. Experiment 1006 lives. Oliver believes Oliver died. Poppy lives. But how much of Poppy Ludwig exists unchanged inside the doll? Sawyer lives as a backup. Is the backup Harley Sawyer? Or a copy that believes it is Harley Sawyer? The player rises from the Poppy gel. Are they exactly the same person who was thrown in? Chapter 5 ends before any of these questions can be answered. And that is why the story from Chapter 1 through Chapter 5 is not simply a sequence of monsters. It is one long experiment about identity. The company keeps asking whether a human can be turned into something else and still remain useful. The victims keep asking whether they can become something else and still remain themselves. Those are completely different questions. Playtime Co. cared about function. The toys care about personhood. The prototype's deepest anger comes from being treated as function. He was a prototype, a step, a method, not an end. And then, tragically, he begins treating everyone else according to function too. To see how completely Chapter 5 changes the earlier story, it helps to separate the history of Playtime Co. into two different dreams. The first dream belonged to Elliot Ludwig. The second belonged to the corporation that grew around him. Elliot's dream, at least in its most sympathetic form, was about creating wonder and overcoming loss. The company's later dream was about scaling whatever worked. Those goals could coexist while the discoveries remained harmless. A clever toy could be mass-produced. A popular mascot could become a franchise. A successful factory process could be expanded. But once the discovery involved consciousness, scaling became monstrous. If Elliot found a substance that could preserve or restore life, a grieving father might see hope. A corporation sees intellectual property. If one human mind can survive transformation, a grieving father might see a path toward his daughter. A corporation sees a workforce. This is why Elliot's exact moral responsibility remains more complicated than Sawyer's. Sawyer's actions are explicit. He advocates turning people into giant toys to reduce payroll and solve operational problems. He conditions living experiments. He weaponizes hunger. He seeks control. Elliot's responsibility is older and more ambiguous. He begins the research. He participates in the experiments that make 1006 and 1007 possible. He creates the conditions later executives exploit. Chapter 5 makes it impossible to portray him as simply an innocent founder whose company was corrupted after he disappeared. Oliver's anger exists because Elliot did something terrible to him. Even if Elliot believed he was trying to save lives, the prototype is evidence that his method treated one child as a means to another. That is where the story's use of family becomes important. A parent is supposed to see a child as irreplaceable. Elliot's grief over Poppy comes from believing exactly that. Yet in trying to restore the irreplaceable child, he turns Oliver into a replaceable test subject. The contradiction is brutal. Poppy is too precious to risk, so someone else must absorb the risk. Oliver realizes what that means. He understands that Elliot's tenderness toward him exists beneath a hierarchy. Poppy comes first. The experiment confirms it. When he rejects the name Ollie, he is rejecting the relationship Elliot still wants to claim. You cannot call me your boy after turning me into the thing that proved your real child could be restored? This makes the prototype's identity very different from the common horror trope, where a scientist accidentally becomes their own monster. Experiment 1006 is not Elliot punished for his ambition. He is the child who paid for Elliot's ambition. For years, theories tried to identify the prototype as Elliot himself because the connection seemed so obvious. Chapter 5 chooses a more painful answer. The founder is not literally the monster pursuing us. His decisions created the person who became that monster. The consequences outlive him. That theme appears throughout Playtime Co. The factory's leaders do not need to survive for their systems to continue hurting people. Gracie's conditioning survives in recordings. Sawyer survives as data. Elliot's experiments survive in Poppy and the prototype. The company's games survive in Mommy and Lily's behavior. The hour of joy survives in the social order beneath the factory. Institutional violence becomes almost immortal because people can die while procedures remain. Poppy's identity has the opposite problem. She survives, but much of her original world disappears. Consider what it means to be Poppy Ludwig inside the Poppy Playtime doll. Your father's company turns your image or name into a product. Your body is artificial. People may see you as merchandise. The scientists around you know you as an experiment. The company's future crimes grow from research connected to your resurrection. Then the factory collapses. The prototype, whose suffering is connected directly to your restoration, becomes the ruler of the survivors. You are imprisoned. Years pass. By the time the player opens the case, almost everyone from your old human life is dead. Poppy's controlling behavior in chapters 2 and 4 becomes easier to understand through that history, even when it is not justified. She has almost no power in the ordinary sense. Her body is small. She cannot overpower Huggy. She cannot fight Mommy directly. She cannot physically defeat the prototype. What she has is knowledge, so she uses knowledge the way larger creatures use strength. She plans. She withholds information. She redirects the train. She recruits the player without full consent. She builds alliances with Kissy and Doey. She tries to turn the factory's systems against the prototype. Poppy's greatest flaw is that desperation makes manipulation feel necessary. The prototype has the same flaw on a larger scale. He manipulates because he believes only he understands what must happen. The two are more alike than either wants to admit. They are both survivors of Elliot's earliest work. They both believe Playtime Co. created something unforgivable. They both want to reshape the future of the factory. They both make decisions for other people. The difference is degree and direction. Poppy retains a stronger moral concern for innocent life. The hour of joy horrifies her. She protects allies, she can apologize, she forms genuine bonds with Kissy. By chapter 5, she acknowledges what she did to the player. The prototype moves further toward authoritarian control. He punishes rebellion, manipulates followers, destroys safe haven, and treats other bodies as components. But the family connection means their conflict is not simply good doll versus evil monster. It is an argument between two surviving products of the same original sin. What should be done with the world that made them? Poppy's answer increasingly becomes destruction. The prototype's answer becomes possession. Neither answer is gentle. The player's role is to force a third possibility into existence. That is why the protagonist becomes more important with every chapter. At the beginning, we know almost nothing about them. By chapter 5, their actions have altered nearly every surviving power in the factory. They free Poppy, defeat Huggy's first attack, kill Mommy, expose the hour of joy, kill CatNap, help destroy the doctor's active body, reach safe haven, kill Doey after his breakdown, survive Lily, help pursue the master backup, witness Huggy and Kissy's reunion, survive the prototype, die, return, restore Sawyer's backup. No one entering the factory could have predicted that chain of events. Not even Poppy, possibly not even the prototype. This creates an interesting distinction between manipulation and control. The prototype can manipulate the player. He cannot fully control them. Poppy can redirect the player. She cannot fully control them either. The player repeatedly creates outcomes no one wanted. Mommy dies in a machine. CatNap's service ends with the prototype killing him. Dewey's grief becomes a boss fight. Sawyer is killed, then accidentally restored. The protagonist is a destabilizing force inside systems that depend on predictable behavior. That may be why so many characters insist on games and rules. Playtime Co. was built around making subjects predictable. Do this. Stand here. Press that. Follow the color. Complete the test. Obey the schedule. The player survives by learning the rule and then using the system in a way the controller did not expect. Musical memory accelerates beyond reasonable limits, so the player stops the machine. Statues is rigged, so the player escapes the intended path. Mommy sets a game, so the player turns industrial equipment against her. CatNap controls the gas, so the player redirects the systems producing it. The doctor controls the prison infrastructure, so the player dismantles access to his network. Lily controls movement through song, so the player uses the environment to break out of her staged world. The prototype controls the route, but the player keeps surviving the outcomes. This is why the grab pack is more than a gameplay tool. Symbolically, it lets the protagonist reach into Playtime Co. systems and use them differently. A factory tool becomes a survival weapon. Employee equipment becomes a means of destroying the company's creations. The player is taking the infrastructure of exploitation and constantly repurposing it. That does not make them morally clean. The unanswered question of their past remains. Why were they absent on August 8, 1995? Why did they leave Playtime Co? What did they know before they left? Why does the language around conscience matter so much? Chapter 5 deliberately returns to the idea that the player came back because conscience eventually brought them home. That wording suggests the protagonist's relationship to the factory may involve more than being an unlucky former employee. Maybe they knew something. Maybe they suspected. Maybe they participated in a department connected to the experiments. Maybe they failed to act. The story has not yet confirmed the full answer. And because it has not, any specific identification should still be treated as theory. Chapter 5 introduces material that encourages new guesses, including records connected to employees and families whose relevance is not fully resolved. But the most important fact remains the one established from the beginning. The player worked here. They were not present for the hour of joy, and their return is tied to unfinished guilt. That is enough to make the journey personal without inventing an identity the game has not given us. The theme of guilt also explains why the factory can feel like a form of punishment. The player repeatedly descends. Every chapter goes deeper, every lower level reveals something worse. This is not just level design. It mirrors confession. The protagonist begins with the public face of Playtime Co., then enters production, then the game station, then Playcare, then the prison, then the labs. The physical journey strips away corporate lies in the same order. A person might strip away excuses. First, the company made toys. Then, the company tested children. Then, the company used an orphanage. Then, the company imprisoned experiments. Then, the company tried to conquer death. At the bottom is not one secret. It is the logic connecting all the secrets. People became material. That is the entire factory in one sentence. And every major antagonist represents a different consequence of that idea. Huggy is a person reduced to security. Mommy is a person reduced to a host. CatNap is a child reduced to a caretaker and chemical delivery system. Yarnaby is a being reduced to engineered loyalty. Doughy is 3 children reduced to one flexible product. Lily is a person reduced to a conditioned doll identity. Sawyer becomes a person reduced to information and infrastructure. Oliver is reduced to a prototype. Poppy is reduced to the successful result. Even the player risks becoming something new when Poppy Gel restores them. Once the pattern is visible, the title Poppy Playtime becomes almost cruel. Playtime is what the company calls the world it built. The people trapped inside it experience something closer to permanent experimentation. The earliest known period of the prototype's life also explains why calling him purely evil misses something important. Before CatNap became his follower, Theodore Grambell was simply a child in Playcare. Theo spoke about a mysterious friend. Adults initially had reason to treat that friend as imaginary. The child drew himself with a dark skeletal figure. He followed instructions that seemed to come from somewhere hidden. Eventually, the truth emerged. The friend was Experiment 1006. The prototype was using gaps in Playcare's security to communicate with Theodore, and he encouraged the boy to steal or access things inside the facility. That sounds manipulative, and it was, but then something happened that does not fit the image of Experiment 1006 as a creature incapable of care. Theodore tried to use grab pack equipment as part of an escape plan. He was a child handling dangerous industrial technology. He made a mistake. The electrical discharge badly injured him. The prototype had a choice: continue escaping, or give up the opportunity and bring Theodore to someone who could provide medical help. Experiment 1006 chose Theodore. He carried the injured boy to an adult. That act exposed him and led to recapture. There was no obvious strategic benefit. At that moment, the prototype behaved like someone who genuinely valued a child more than his own freedom. That event becomes the foundation of CatNap's later worship. From Theodore's perspective, the prototype did not merely promise salvation. He sacrificed freedom to save him. Then Playtime Co. took Theodore and turned him into Experiment 1188. Early conditioning records suggest the child initially still remembered his human identity. When asked who he was, Theodore resisted the mascot name. He was Theodore, not CatNap. That resistance faded. After weeks of conditioning, the human name effectively disappeared from his responses. This is one of the most revealing details in the entire Bigger Bodies initiative. Transformation alone did not automatically erase identity. The company had to work on the mind afterward. Theodore survived the procedure with memory. Then the system taught him to stop being Theodore. That means the mascots we meet are not simply human minds naturally confused by new bodies. Their identities were deliberately overridden. The process makes the company's use of toy names more sinister. A mascot name is not just a label employees use. It can be the final stage of erasing a person. Marie Payne becomes Mommy Longlegs. Theodore becomes CatNap. 3 children become Dewey. Gracie becomes Lily. Oliver becomes the prototype, although in his case he chooses the new description as an act of rejection. That difference may be why Experiment 1006 retains such unusual independence. He is not successfully conditioned into a cheerful commercial identity. There is no beloved prototype toy line that tells him who he is supposed to be. He names the horror himself. He knows he is the prototype. He understands his function in Elliot's plan. The company never manages to give him a friendlier story powerful enough to replace that knowledge. This may also explain his unusual relationship with names and voices. He uses Ollie when manipulation requires innocence. He becomes the prototype when claiming power. He mimics others when identity itself becomes useful equipment. For a creature created by the destruction of one identity, names are tools. Poppy handles identity differently. She embraces the name Poppy because the human child and the doll share it. That continuity gives her something Oliver did not have. The product identity is not a total replacement. It is connected to the person Elliot wanted to restore. This may help explain why Poppy appears psychologically more stable than many later experiments. Her body changed, her world changed, but her name, her relationship to Elliot, and at least some sense of personal continuity survived. Oliver experienced the opposite. His transformation proves that he was not the person the experiment was ultimately for. The more Poppy exists as Poppy, the more the prototype is reminded that Ollie was expendable. The connection between the two becomes even more complicated when we look at what happened after their discovery. At some point, employees found evidence of the prototype, Poppy, and Elliot's death hidden beneath the company's public world. This discovery helped expose senior staff to a level of experimentation that had not been part of ordinary operations. Instead of shutting everything down, the company learned from it. That decision creates the second generation of horror. Elliot's secret work becomes corporate research. Harley Sawyer arrives and expands the logic into the Bigger Bodies initiative. Scientists dissect Poppy for study. They analyze Experiment 1006. They try to understand how these early subjects remain alive. The children below Playtime Co. become the next population to be transformed. The company does not look at Poppy and Oliver and see two people whose existence proves a moral boundary has been crossed. It sees proof of concept. That is the moment grief becomes industry. The exact roles of executives matter because Playtime Co. is not run by one cartoon villain. Laith Pierre represents production and corporate authority. Stella Graber becomes deeply connected to Playcare and the handling of children. Harley Sawyer drives the experimental program. Security personnel manage containment. Researchers create procedures. Marketing turns mascots into friendly public identities. Different departments can tell themselves they are only responsible for one piece. That fragmentation is how systems like the Bigger Bodies initiative become possible. The person evaluating a child at the game station is not necessarily the person performing surgery. The person designing a commercial may never enter the prison. The person maintaining a grab pack station may know nothing about Poppy Gel. The company can therefore contain both ordinary employees and people directly responsible for atrocities. This is why Poppy condemns the Hour of Joy's indiscriminate killing. If every employee were equally guilty, her objection would be weaker. The massacre matters because the prototype turns institutional guilt into collective punishment. He does not distinguish enough. That decision repeats in the post-Hour of Joy world. Once Experiment 1006 begins seeing categories instead of individuals, anyone can become acceptable collateral. Playtime employee, follower, heretic, broken toy, useful toy, missing toy, Audimal, peace. The company trained everyone to think through categories. The prototype inherits the habit. This is also why Safe Haven threatens him so much. Safe Haven refuses the categories. Its residents are not Playtime assets. They are not prototype followers. They are not necessarily Poppy's soldiers. They are simply survivors trying to exist. A neutral community is dangerous to any ruler who believes everyone must eventually choose a side. Dewey's Refuge proves a fourth option exists. Not company, not prototype, not destruction. Life after both. The prototype's sabotage removes that possibility, whether he destroys Safe Haven primarily for strategic reasons or because independent communities undermine his authority. The result is the same. The factory becomes more polarized, and Poppy's plan becomes easier to justify once the peaceful alternative has been eliminated. That is one of the cruelest things the prototype does. He does not only kill people, he destroys options. The same logic appears in his relationship with the orphans. Before the Hour of Joy, the children are trapped under Playtime Co. After the uprising, Experiment 1006 controls where they go. Poppy later begs for their fate to change. The prototype refuses. He fears what freedom would mean for his own future and for the strange immortal family he wants to preserve. His idea of eternity is inseparable from loneliness. If Poppy leaves, if the children leave, if the toys scatter, then what exactly did he win? He destroyed the company but remains trapped in its basement. He cannot return to Oliver's human life. He cannot become the child Elliot once tried to call his boy. He cannot die easily. Immortality without belonging becomes another prison. So he starts building belonging through control. CatNap worships him. Others fear him. Poppy must come home. The orphans must remain part of his solution. The factory must remain his world. This turns the phrase better place into something deeply sad. Oliver may once have wanted a place where he could be safe. The prototype eventually becomes the reason nobody else can leave. And when Poppy tries to destroy the factory entirely, she is attacking more than a building. She is attacking the only permanent structure the prototype has left. That helps explain the intensity of his response in Chapter 4. He does not simply stop an explosive plan. He forces Poppy to watch the alternative die. Safe haven burns. Dewey collapses. The player falls. Poppy is driven deeper. Then Chapter 5 brings her physically back into his reach. Come home is not a generic threat to the prototype. The factory is home because there is nowhere else in the world for what he has become. To Poppy, the same factory is a prison. Their conflict is therefore also a conflict over the meaning of home. The player experiences that word differently again. For the protagonist, the factory is a place they left. Chapter 5's resurrection sequence uses the language of returning home through conscience, implying that the building holds unresolved responsibility. 3 characters, 3 meanings. The prototype, home as the only world that will contain him. Poppy, home as captivity. The player, home as guilt. All 3 are pulled back toward the same place for completely different reasons, and Harley Sawyer makes the contrast even sharper. Sawyer does not need a home, he needs a system. Wherever his consciousness can access infrastructure, he can potentially exist. That is why the master backup reveal is such a dangerous ending. Experiment 1006 may dominate through physical presence and manipulation. Sawyer can dominate through information. If Chapter 6 continues directly from the ending, the player is caught between 2 forms of immortality created by the same company. One lives through regenerative experimental matter, the other lives through copies and machines. Neither is human in the ordinary sense. Both began as human beings, and both demonstrate that Playtime Co. solved the wrong problem. It learned how to keep a mind functioning. It never learned when to let a person go. Now we can return to the 5 chapters one more time, not to repeat their events, but to look at what each chapter actually contributes to the larger mystery. Chapter 1 contributes absence. The entire horror of a tight squeeze is built around things that should be present and are not. Employees should be working. They are gone. Huggy should be on the pedestal. He disappears. The factory should be producing toys. The machines are silent. Poppy should be a doll. She opens her eyes. The chapter gives almost no direct answers because its job is to make the player distrust the surface. Even the earliest VHS tapes establish this pattern. A security-oriented corporate message introduces rules and warnings with the same cheerful professionalism Playtime Co. uses everywhere else. The company wants employees to believe the building is controlled. The very existence of those warnings suggests the opposite. Then there is the log connected to Experiment 1006. Long before we see the prototype, the company already knows this experiment is unusual. He is intelligent. He is dangerous. He attempts escape. He can improvise tools. He understands technology. The tape is one of the most important pieces of Chapter 1 because it quietly tells us that Huggy is not necessarily the greatest threat. The player does not yet know what Experiment 1006 looks like. That absence lets the number become almost mythic. By Chapter 2, we see the hand. By Chapter 3, the prototype becomes CatNap's god. By Chapter 4, he becomes Ollie. By Chapter 5, he becomes Oliver. The story reveals him in reverse order: first consequence, then body part, then influence, then voice, then identity. That is excellent lore structure, because each reveal changes the meaning of the previous one. Chapter 1's prototype tape initially sounds like background horror. After Chapter 5, it is a record of Elliot's transformed adopted son being studied by the company that inherited his father's work. The same retroactive effect applies to Poppy's case. In Chapter 1, the case looks like a creepy display. Later we learn it is confinement. Poppy was not placed there because the company wanted to showcase its famous doll. The prototype locked her away. The flower marking the route becomes part invitation, part warning, part memorial to the obsession that began everything. The player opening the case is therefore an act with enormous political consequences inside the post-Hour of Joy factory. Imagine the situation from the prototype's perspective. The rebel you imprisoned years ago is freed. The person who frees her is a former Playtime employee. That employee survives Huggy. then keeps descending. From the moment Poppy's eyes open, Experiment 1006 has reason to monitor the player closely. This may help explain why the death screen language across chapters often seems invested in keeping the protagonist alive. Get Up appears again and again. The exact speaker behind every instance is not always straightforward, and game over messages operate partly outside ordinary continuity. But the repeated phrase creates the feeling that someone sees value in the player's survival. By Chapter 5, the prototype literally places the protagonist in restorative material after inflicting a fatal wound. Whatever his ultimate purpose, the idea that the player is still useful becomes difficult to dismiss. Chapter 1 also establishes Huggy as a special case among bigger bodies. He is not introduced in a laboratory cage. He is standing in the lobby. That means Playtime Co. trusted Experiment 1170 enough to place him close to public or semi-public areas. Records describe him as an optimal or highly successful subject because he could display useful intelligence while remaining obedient under expected conditions. Security is the perfect role for a creature like Huggy. His appearance is friendly to children, his size intimidates adults, his body can move through industrial spaces, and if the company can condition him to recognize intruders, he becomes both mascot and guard. But obedience is always conditional. That is the flaw in the bigger bodies initiative. A human mind inside a toy is not a forklift. It interprets. Huggy can become aggressive when threatened. He can pursue objectives. The prototype can influence or redirect the behavior of other experiments. Once the human chain of command collapses during the hour of joy, the security asset becomes one of the factory's deadliest predators. Yet Chapter 5 proves the original conditioning never completely defines him either. Huggy can leave the prototype's side. He can react to Kissy. He can calm down. Some individual will remain under the accumulated layers of orders, hunger, trauma, and violence. Kissy is even stronger evidence. Her most important scenes are rarely boss encounters. She helps, she waits, she shows fear. She acts carefully around the player. She cares about Poppy. The contrast between the two Wuggy experiments suggests that transformation does not create one predictable personality. The bodies may be products. The people inside them remain different. That is why the company's belief in standardization was doomed. You can manufacture identical plush shells. You cannot mass-produce identical consciousness. Chapter 2 contributes the machinery of selection. The game station is where the player first sees how Playtime Co. turns childhood into measurable data. The games are fun only if you ignore who is observing. A child's memory becomes a score. Reaction time becomes a score. Physical endurance becomes a score. Scores become recommendations. Recommendations can become assignments, and assignments can end in transformation. The horror is not that the game station contains deadly games after the hour of joy. The horror is that even before the massacre, the games were feeding a system that could decide what a child's body was worth. Mommy Longlegs belongs at the center of that environment because her story mirrors the children she once supervised. Marie Payne was not born as Mommy. She became a role. The company discovered her affection for children and exploited it. Instead of treating that affection as evidence of personhood, it treated it as useful behavior. This is a pattern with Sawyer. If a trait improves function, keep it. If a memory interferes with function, condition it. If hunger can enforce behavior, manipulate hunger. If affection can produce obedience, manipulate affection. By the time the player meets Mommy, years of starvation and isolation have transformed that exploited maternal tendency into possessiveness. She wants to play. She wants the player to obey. She reacts violently when the game stops following her rules, and she is terrified of being absorbed by the prototype. That fear gives us one of the earliest hints that the post-Hour of Joy world has developed its own form of exploitation. Mommy escaped the company only to live under the shadow of another being who can use her body after death. The mechanical hand dragging her remains away is the visual bridge between two systems. Playtime Co. turns people into parts. The prototype turns dead experiments into parts. Different ruler. Same reduction. Bunzo Bunny, the mini Huggies, and PJ Pug-a-Pillar also contribute to the sense that the game station has become an ecosystem rather than an attraction. These creatures are not necessarily ideological followers of Mommy. They are hungry participants in a territory she controls. The rules of each game provide structure to violence. That structure may be one reason Mommy clings to it. After 10 years of chaos, the game station rules are something she still knows. Start game. Follow rules. Reward success. punish failure. Without the company, those routines become ritual. Chapter 2's greatest reveal is therefore not the prototype's hand. It is that the factory's old systems continue operating psychologically even when the humans are gone. The toys reproduce the institution because the institution shaped them. Chapter 3 contributes memory. Playcare is filled with traces of who the experiments used to be. Theodore's history, children's beds, schools, counseling, recorded voices, smiling critters imagery, dreams induced by red smoke. The chapter is obsessed with things the mind cannot completely bury. CatNap may no longer answer as Theodore, but his bond with the prototype comes from Theodore. Miss Delight's starvation history shapes her. DogDay understands betrayal. Poppy hears the hour of joy in memory. The player experiences distorted visions under the gas. The whole chapter asks what remains after identity has been manipulated. Red smoke is perfect for this because it attacks perception rather than the body alone. It turns internal fear into environment. A monster can be escaped by running. A hallucination changes the information used to decide where to run. That makes CatNap an ideal guardian for a place built around conditioning. Playcare controlled children by shaping what they believed. CatNap controls intruders by shaping what they perceive. Again, the experiment reproduces the institution. The school and Home Sweet Home reinforce the same idea. A school is supposed to teach someone how to become more fully themselves. Playtime School participates in a system designed to turn children into someone else. A home is supposed to provide safety. Home Sweet Home feeds children into experimentation. A sleep-themed mascot should comfort. CatNap's gas creates nightmares. Every comforting concept is inverted. This is why deep sleep feels darker than the first 2 chapters, even before the Hour of Joy tape. We are no longer seeing a toy factory that became dangerous. We are seeing a childcare system that was dangerous while it was functioning exactly as intended. Chapter 4 contributes hierarchy. Safe Haven takes us below the orphanage and shows that the experiments developed politics after the humans died. Before this chapter, we can identify territories and loyalties, but the social map remains vague. Chapter 4 makes the factions visible. The Doctor controls the prison and its infrastructure. The prototype moves through the lower facility as a larger power even Sawyer must account for. Dewey protects Safe Haven. Poppy builds a coalition around destroying Experiment 1006. Kissy chooses Poppy. Other toys simply want to survive. This is not an abandoned building full of independent monsters. It is a divided society. The Doctor's position is especially interesting because he is both a relic of Playtime Co. and a post-Hour of Joy ruler. Harley Sawyer helped create the creatures now surrounding him. Then his employers turned him into one. After the massacre, he survives through the prison systems and establishes an uneasy relationship with the prototype. Neither one truly trusts the other. They have overlapping enemies and competing forms of power. The prototype has influence over experiments and physical freedom. The Doctor has surveillance, doors, machines, and data. This uneasy coexistence helps explain why the lower factory does not collapse into one simple empire. No single being controls everything. The prototype is the strongest long-term force, but the building is too large and the surviving personalities too independent for complete control. Sawyer's history also shows how quickly scientific ambition can become self-justification. He was intelligent. He understood neuroscience. He recognized that Playtime Co. was failing. From his perspective, the Bigger Bodies initiative solved multiple problems at once. That is precisely what makes him dangerous. He can explain the horror in practical language. Fewer employees, lower payroll, less risk of human workers discovering restricted operations, more specialized labor, a security creature here, a host there, a caretaker below. The proposal does not require supernatural evil. It only requires defining people as costs. Once that definition is accepted, everything afterward can be optimized. Yarnaby demonstrates Sawyer's personal approach to control. Instead of relying entirely on broad conditioning, Sawyer isolates the subject emotionally. Make one person the center of the experiment's world. Remove competing attachments, reward dependence. Then loyalty feels natural because the subject has been denied alternatives. This is abusive even without surgery. Inside a living mascot program, it becomes monstrous. Yarnaby's devotion to Sawyer is therefore the darker counterpart to CatNap's devotion to the prototype. CatNap's loyalty originates partly in a real act of rescue. The prototype sacrificed an escape to save Theodore. Yarnaby's loyalty is deliberately engineered by the person who wants to own it. Both become extreme. Both show why attachment inside Playtime Co. is dangerous. Every emotional bond can be turned into a control mechanism. Dewey offers a healthier alternative. He protects Safe Haven not because the residents worship him. They are family. There is reciprocity. He wants them to survive even when that survival conflicts with Poppy's strategy. That is why his breakdown hurts so much. The game spends enough time showing that a bigger body can build community before destroying the community. If Dewey had always been violent, his boss fight would be ordinary. Instead, the fight feels like the prototype murdering Safe Haven a second time through grief. Experiment 1006 does not need to strike Dewey directly. He creates the conditions that make Dewey destroy himself. That is manipulation at its most efficient. Poppy's role in the tragedy is more uncomfortable. Her plan helps create the vulnerability the prototype exploits. She wants an outcome so badly that she accepts enormous risk. Even if she does not intend Safe Haven's destruction, Dewey is correct that her strategy treats lives as expendable. This makes Chapter 4 the point where Poppy's morality is seriously tested. Opposing the villain does not automatically make the method good. That lesson continues into Chapter 5. Broken Things contributes origin. It descends past the consequences of the bigger body's initiative and reaches the older research underneath it. The labs contain a different atmosphere from the game station or Playcare because the questions are more fundamental. What is life? What is death? What can be restored? What can be modified? What can be neutralized? The company's commercial language fades. Now we are close to the science that made everything else possible. The wrong side Automals embody the corruption of that science after the hour of joy. Their altered forms imply experimentation continuing under the prototype's influence. Some of these creatures are treated as mistakes, hunters, subjects, or raw material. The exact procedure behind every Automal is less important than what their existence proves. Experiment 1006 did not simply preserve the survivors. He began making his own broken things. That is the final collapse of his revolutionary claim. A victim of experimentation becomes an experimenter, not because the game wants to say victims inevitably become abusers. Safe Haven proves otherwise, Kissy proves otherwise, DogDay proves otherwise, Giblet proves otherwise. The prototype chooses to reproduce the logic because control serves his goals. That distinction matters. Trauma explains behavior. It does not erase responsibility. Lily Lovebraids takes the same theme in a different direction. Her fate is not simply that a bad employee receives poetic justice. The danger of that reading is that it turns transformation into a deserved punishment when the story has spent 5 chapters showing how dehumanizing the process is. Gracie may have participated in conditioning children. That makes her responsible for harm. Turning her into Lily does not repair that harm. It creates another victim while leaving the system intact. The prototype's punishment, therefore, resembles Playtime's own morality. Someone is categorized as guilty. Their body becomes available for use. Their suffering is justified by the goal. This is exactly how cycles continue. The master backup provides the technological version of the same cycle. The player wants a tool against the prototype. To get it, they reactivate Sawyer. A dangerous mind returns because its information is useful. That is what Playtime Co did repeatedly. Keep the dangerous experiment because it has value. Study 1006 because he is interesting. Preserve Sawyer because his knowledge might be needed. Use Poppy because her biology is unique. Every time someone says the information is too valuable to destroy, the horror gains another chance to survive. The data center ending therefore asks whether the player will repeat the mistake. Sawyer may know how to neutralize the prototype. If so, cooperation could become tempting. But cooperating with Harley Sawyer means relying on the architect of the bigger body's initiative to help solve the crisis created by the bigger body's initiative. That does not mean cooperation is impossible. It means the price needs to be understood. Poppy Playtime repeatedly puts characters in situations where the only useful tool is contaminated by the person who built it. The grab pack is company equipment. The game station code comes through Mommy. The gas systems belong to Playcare. The prison technology belongs to Sawyer. The master backup contains Sawyer. The Poppy gel that resurrects the protagonist comes from the research that created the entire nightmare. Escape is impossible without touching the machinery of exploitation. The challenge is using it without letting it define the next world. That is the question Chapter 5 leaves open. If the prototype dies, what happens to the factory's survivors? If Sawyer helps, what prevents him from rebuilding? If Poppy is rescued, does she still want the entire facility destroyed? If the player has been changed by the gel, what exactly have they become? If Huggy and Kissy are dead, what happens to their bodies? If they are alive, can they survive the prototype's injuries? If the orphans are truly dead, What remains of the better place Oliver once imagined? And if the prototype cannot die through ordinary violence, is neutralization actually death, or merely another transformation? The franchise has reached a point where every solution resembles an earlier experiment. That is why knowing the exact chronology matters. Without the chronology, Chapter 5 can look like a sudden pile of twists. With the chronology, the twists are the logical result of decisions made decades earlier. Elliot refuses to accept Poppy's death. He experiments with restoration. Oliver becomes the prototype. Poppy is restored. The company discovers the impossible. Sawyer turns the science into a program. Children become bigger bodies. The prototype gains followers among the victims. The hour of joy destroys the human company. The prototype becomes the dominant post-company power. Poppy resists. The prototype imprisons her. The player frees her. Poppy recruits the player. The player kills or defeats major experiments. The prototype manipulates the descent. Safe haven falls. Poppy's alliance fractures. The player reaches the labs. The prototype takes Poppy again. The player dies and returns through the same science that started everything. Then Sawyer returns as Data. The ending is not random escalation. It is a circle closing. The first experiment asked whether life could return. Chapter 5 answers with 3 different forms of return. Huggy returns after his fall. The player returns after death. Sawyer returns after destruction. Poppy Playtime has become a story where resurrection is almost common, and that makes death more frightening rather than less. Because if dying does not guarantee release, what does? There is another way to follow the story that makes the scale of Playtime Co.'s collapse even clearer. Ignore the chapter numbers for a moment and follow the years. In 1930, Playtime Co. begins as Elliot Ludwig's company. At this point, nothing requires us to imagine an underground empire of living toys. The public business grows through ordinary products, branding, invention, and Elliot's reputation. Over time, the company develops the polished identity we recognize in the abandoned factory. Playtime is colorful. Playtime is safe. Playtime understands children. Playtime creates friends. That image becomes so powerful that later atrocities can hide behind it. A company known for making children happy gains social trust. That trust matters when the company later operates an orphanage. It matters when families visit. It matters when children are invited into special programs. Horror becomes easier to conceal when the institution committing it has spent decades manufacturing innocence. Elliot's personal tragedies happen within this expanding success. His family life suffers. His daughter Poppy dies. And the founder who built a career around making impossible ideas real turns that mentality toward mortality. The exact chronology of every early experiment remains partially obscured, but experiment 814 gives us a baseline for the research. The attempt with the rat fails. The possibility survives. Then the scale changes from animal testing to human transformation. Oliver enters Elliot's life. The available evidence identifies him as an adopted son and connects him to Playcare. The important point is not the paperwork of the adoption. It is the relationship revealed by their conversation after transformation. Elliot speaks to him as family. Oliver believes that family status was conditional. He becomes Experiment 1006, the prototype. His body is radically different from the later mascot experiments. It is biomechanical, assembled from organic and mechanical structures. Designed before the Bigger Bodies initiative standardizes the process around recognizable toy characters. That helps explain his name. He is not only a prototype for Poppy's restoration, he is a prototype for the entire idea that a person can persist in a constructed vessel. The experiment works, but success is measured differently depending on who is judging. To Elliot, success means the path toward Poppy is open. To later scientists, success means consciousness transfer is possible. To Oliver, success means being trapped in a body built to prove someone else can be saved. All 3 interpretations can be true at the same time. That is what makes the experiment morally catastrophic, even if the procedure technically succeeds. Poppy follows as Experiment 1007. Her existence becomes the most important proof that Elliot's goal has been achieved. The dead child can return in a doll body. This also retroactively changes the famous Poppy Playtime product. The company's first great doll is not merely advanced because it can speak naturally or respond like a child. The living Poppy is something fundamentally different from ordinary merchandise. A person is inside the image. The public does not understand the secret. That separation between public toy and private experiment becomes the model for the later company. A mascot can exist in 2 forms: the commercial character, The living bigger body, Huggy Wuggy, can be a plush sold in stores and Experiment 1170 standing in the lobby. Mommy Longlegs can be a toy line and Marie Payne's experimental body. CatNap can be a smiling critter and Theodore Grambell. The brand becomes a mask the company can place over a person. At some point before the Bigger Bodies initiative reaches full scale, Elliot dies. Chapter 5's records make his death part of the mystery surrounding the early experiments. Employees eventually discover evidence connecting Elliot, Poppy, and the prototype. The founder is gone. The discovery remains. This is a dangerous moment in the timeline because there is still an opportunity for Playtime Co. to stop. Leadership could expose what happened, destroy the research, protect the remaining children, close the hidden laboratories. Instead, the company treats the discovery as something that can be continued. Harley Sawyer becomes the person capable of turning possibility into program. Sawyer's own history with Elliot adds another layer. He had been recognized as exceptionally intelligent from a young age through company-related educational opportunities. Elliot saw ability in him but also disliked the absence of humility. Sawyer later returns as a trained medical professional and researcher. The child prodigy becomes the scientist who pushes the company far beyond Elliot's original personal experiment. There is a bitter symmetry here. Elliot sees brilliance in Sawyer but questions his character. Later, the company values the brilliance enough to ignore exactly what Elliot feared. Sawyer's early neurological experiments do not immediately create stable bigger bodies. Some subjects show limited brain activity. Some maintain consciousness only briefly. Failure after failure teaches the researchers what does not work. Then Experiment 1160, Boxy Boo, demonstrates a major success. For Sawyer, this validates the Bigger Bodies initiative. A living toy can be made large enough to perform useful functions. The company's response is not horror, it is expansion. The project accelerates around 1990. Huggy Wuggy becomes Experiment 1170. His commercial character had already become one of Playtime Co.'s greatest successes, making him the ideal public-facing body for a security experiment. Kissy Missy follows as a counterpart associated with calming or interacting with Huggy. Pianosaurus becomes another bigger body, though Sawyer considers some experiments more useful than others. Yarnaby is shaped through intense personal conditioning. Bunzo, PJ, Mommy, Longlegs, CatNap, and many others emerge from an increasingly mature process. The numbers themselves tell a story. 1006 and 1007 belong to an earlier generation. By the 1100s and 1200s, the company is no longer proving a human can survive transformation. It is refining what kind of living product it wants. The game station becomes part of this industrial refinement. Children from Playcare can be observed without being told the real reason. The tests provide data. A child who performs well in one category can be considered for a particular body or function. This is one reason the game station's theatricality matters. If the children understood they were being evaluated for transformation, fear would contaminate the results. Make it fun. Make it colorful. Let the mascots encourage them. Then the company receives more natural behavior. The children participate in their own assessment because they believe they are playing. Around the same era, Theodore Grambell's story unfolds. The prototype has not disappeared from the company's problems. Experiment 1006 escapes or operates outside intended confinement, communicating with Theo inside Playcare. The attempted escape with the grab packs ends in Theodore's electrocution. The prototype sacrifices his own opportunity to save him. Security recaptures 1006. The company then takes Theodore and transforms him into CatNap. From the company's perspective, they have converted a problematic child into a useful caretaker. From Theodore's perspective, the being who saved his life is now trapped by the same people who changed his body. The future worship is almost inevitable. The company could never compete with that emotional memory. Conditioning erases the name Theodore. It does not erase gratitude. This is one of Playtime Co.'s recurring failures. It can alter identity enough to create a mascot. It cannot reliably predict which emotions survive. Marie Payne retains attachment to children. Theo retains attachment to the prototype. Dewey retains multiple conflicting human personalities. Kissy develops attachments that oppose simple predatory behavior. Poppy retains moral horror over the hour of joy. Consciousness is messy. The initiative requires it to be modular. The contradiction grows until 1995. By then, the factory contains an enormous hidden population of living experiments. Some are obedient. Some are unstable. Some are aware of what happened to them. Some understand that the company controls food, movement, punishment and access to children. The prototype has spent years demonstrating intelligence far beyond what staff are comfortable with. Sawyer and other researchers know Experiment 1006 is dangerous, yet destroying him would mean destroying an extraordinarily valuable subject. Again, usefulness protects the horror. The prototype takes advantage of that hesitation. He coordinates. Different experiments can cooperate. That ability had been noted as one of his unusual strengths. He turns it into revolution. August 8, 1995. Around 11 in the morning, the attack begins. The precision matters. This is not a hunger riot. The experiments are positioned. Multiple areas erupt. The company's own specialized creatures attack the human systems they were created to support. Security fails because security is Huggy. The game station fails because Mommy controls it. Playcare fails because CatNap belongs to the prototype's cause. Containment fails because the beings inside it understand the building. For a short period, the entire logic of the Bigger Bodies initiative reverses. Playtime Co. created specialized bodies to reduce dependence on human labor. During the hour of joy, those specialized bodies make human defense impossible. The very efficiency Sawyer wanted becomes the company's executioner. Then the workers are dead. The outside world sees a vanished workforce and a closed company. Inside, the difficult part begins. Freedom creates hunger. The experiments were never designed to support themselves. Food distribution depended on humans. Maintenance depended on humans. Medical systems depended on humans. The building was an artificial ecosystem with employees at the center. Remove the employees and the ecosystem collapses. Large experiments need enormous quantities of food. Small toys become prey. Bodies are scavenged. Territories form. The prototype survives more easily because his earliest construction appears not to require ordinary sustenance in the same way. That gives him a massive political advantage. A leader who does not starve can wait longer than everyone else. He can control access. He can move through periods that weaken rivals, and he can incorporate materials from the dead into his own form. The post-hour of joy factory therefore becomes increasingly shaped around him, even without formal government. Power follows durability. CatNap enforces his will in Playcare. Other experiments fear becoming part of him. Poppy opposes the direction. At some stage, the conflict over leadership, the remaining orphans, and the future of the factory becomes severe enough that the prototype imprisons her in the case. The exact post-massacre years include events still being filled in by later lore, but one point is clear. By 2005, the prototype has had roughly a decade to shape the ruins. That is the world the player enters, not the immediate aftermath. A mature nightmare. Huggy has been living there for years. Mommy has been living there for years. CatNap has spent years in worship. Miss Delight has survived years after starvation destroyed her sisters. Safe Haven has developed because some toys needed somewhere outside the prototype's control. The Doctor has maintained his own territory. Lily has spent years in isolation. The factory has history after the humans. This is crucial because it gives every antagonist a life between the hour of joy and the player's return. They are not frozen in 1995 waiting for gameplay to begin. They have changed, and the player's arrival in 2005 acts like a stone thrown into an ecosystem that had reached a brutal equilibrium. Freeing Poppy breaks one balance, killing Mommy breaks another, killing CatNap removes a religious enforcer, destroying Sawyer removes a regional ruler. Safe Haven's destruction removes an independent refuge. Chapter by chapter, the player destabilizes every major structure inside Playtime Co. By Chapter 5, the prototype is not simply attacking an intruder. He is dealing with someone who has accidentally helped dismantle the world that existed under him for 10 years. If we follow Huggy Wuggy alone from beginning to end, the evolution of the franchise becomes obvious. Huggy begins as an icon. His commercial concept is simple, a toy that can hug you. The design is friendly enough to become a major success. Then the Bigger Bodies initiative takes that successful character and asks a corporate question. What useful job could a giant Huggy perform? Security. Experiment 1170 is trained to remain in the lobby, observe, react to aggression, and function as a living guardian. This is a grotesque idea disguised by brand familiarity. A normal security guard is an employee with rights, a salary, a schedule, and the ability to quit. Huggy is a person inside a mascot body whose obedience is part of the experiment's value. The company calls that an optimal outcome. The phrase reveals the laboratory perspective perfectly. They are not measuring happiness. They are measuring usefulness. Huggy's earlier escape and aggression records show that obedient never means harmless. Under the wrong conditions, he can kill multiple people and move through the facility with extreme efficiency. The company knows this. It keeps using him. During the hour of joy, the security system turns against security. Afterward, Huggy survives in the upper factory. When the player returns, he initially behaves almost exactly as the company designed him to behave. An intruder enters. Huggy watches. The intruder accesses restricted areas. Huggy pursues. This makes his Chapter 1 behavior more interesting than simple hunger. He may be starving, he may hate employees, he may be influenced by the prototype. But he is also performing the role Playtime Co. burned into him. The protagonist responds by dropping him into the depths. Huggy survives a fall that would destroy an ordinary body. By Chapter 4, he has patched himself together well enough to move aggressively again. The crude self-treatment is important. It suggests practical intelligence. The monster can recognize injury and compensate. Then Chapter 5 adds the final pieces. Huggy is not simply returned to the prototype's service after his fall. He has broken away. The prototype's hunters are interested in him. That means Huggy has agency independent of both Playtime Co. and Experiment 1006. He is furious at the player, which is understandable after Chapter 1. But when Kissy reaches him, aggression can stop. The emotional connection overrides the immediate hunt. That moment is tiny compared with the violence surrounding it, yet it may tell us more about Huggy's personhood than any laboratory report. The company judged him through obedience. The player judged him through danger. Kissy reaches whatever remains beyond both categories. Then the prototype attacks. If Huggy is truly dead after the impalement, his story ends at the exact moment he begins behaving, most like an individual rather than an assigned role. Security monster, predator, runaway, companion, dead. It is a complete tragedy hidden inside the franchise's most marketable face. Kissy Missy's arc approaches the same history from the opposite direction. Her experiment designation, 1172, places her close to Huggy in the company's program. She is associated with reducing or moderating his aggression, which again shows Playtime Co. engineering relationships as functions. If Huggy is dangerous, create a compatible counterpart. That does not mean the resulting bond is fake. It means the company tried to use something emotionally real for operational control. Kissy's behavior after the hour of joy repeatedly exceeds whatever role she was originally assigned. She helps the player in Chapter 2 without demanding a game or reward. She joins Poppy, she experiences fear, she survives injury, she chooses to confront the prototype. Her lost arm in Chapter 4 makes the physical cost visible. By Chapter 5, she is badly damaged before the final Huggy scene even begins. Yet she still approaches him. Kissy's defining quality is not strength. It is empathy under conditions designed to destroy it. That is why her apparent death lands differently from Mommy or CatNap. Kissy shows what the bigger bodies could have been if the company had recognized them as people, and if the post-hour of joy factory had given them a world in which care could survive. Safe Haven briefly creates that kind of world. Kissy creates it between two individuals. The prototype keeps destroying it. Mommy Longlegs represents another possibility. Marie Payne's surviving attachment to children becomes one of the most disturbing examples of the company exploiting a positive trait. Mommy can be hostile to staff. She can be unstable. She can remember enough of human relationships to react to names and loss. But around children, she is warmer. The company does not respond by asking what that means about Marie's surviving identity. It asks how the behavior can be used. Make her the game station host. Reduce direct staff contact. Let the experiment guide children between assessments. Her motherly instinct becomes labor. This is a recurring moral inversion in Playtime Co. Every sign that the experiments are still people becomes evidence that they can be assigned more sophisticated work. Intelligence is not a reason for freedom. It is a reason for more responsibility. Affection is not a reason for dignity. It is a useful behavioral feature. Pain is not a reason to stop. It is data. By 2005, Mommy's original warmth is almost invisible when the player enters her territory. But listen to what she cares about: games, rules, children, cheating, the prototype. These are all pieces of the world that defined her. She has not become random. She has become a damaged concentration of old roles. Her death beside the grinder also exposes the prototype's reputation before we understand his body. Mommy knows he can make her part of something else. The terror is specifically about losing bodily autonomy after death. For a person whose first body was already taken and replaced, that fear is almost unbearable. She was turned into Mommy once. She does not want to be turned into a component again. Then the prototype takes her remains anyway. CatNap's arc is almost the inverse. Mommy fears being absorbed. CatNap willingly offers himself. Why? Because Theodore's relationship with Experiment 1006 began before transformation. The prototype saved him. That real act of care becomes the seed of absolute devotion. Then Playtime Co. turns Theo into a creature designed to control sleep and deliver red smoke. The conditioning eventually erases his human name. The one emotional certainty left is the savior. A child loses himself and keeps the god. That is why CatNap's religion is so powerful. He does not need theological doctrine. The prototype is the being who chose him when everyone else used him. From that perspective, every later command can be rationalized. If the prototype says the hour of joy is liberation, CatNap participates. If DogDay resists, DogDay becomes a heretic. If Playcare must be controlled, CatNap controls it. The act of rescue becomes retroactive proof that the prototype is always right. This is how gratitude becomes fanaticism. Yet CatNap is not completely without care. He protects surviving children from some dangers after the hour of joy. That detail prevents him from becoming a flat cultist. Theodore's original concern for safety may still exist, but it has been subordinated to the prototype's worldview. He can protect children while torturing DogDay. He can remember rescue while inflicting fear. Human beings are capable of contradictory loyalties. The bigger bodies preserve that complexity. DogDay proves that not every smiling critter accepts the prototype. His body is mutilated because he resists. His language identifies CatNap's system accurately: a god, followers, heretics, punishment. DogDay's imprisonment shows that the post-hour of joy world has developed ideology. This is not simply predator versus prey. There are beliefs about what the prototype is and what the hour of joy meant. CatNap sees salvation. DogDay sees tyranny. Poppy sees massacre. Doey sees a threat to his community. Giblet sees a powerful enemy with a weakness that must be discovered. The same being generates different interpretations depending on what each survivor experienced. That is one reason the lore feels larger than the player's route. The factory has arguments happening before we arrive. Our journey crashes through them. The Doctor's arc is the most literal version of poetic punishment. Sawyer thinks bodies are replaceable. Then his body is replaced. He thinks consciousness can be engineered into useful structures. Then his consciousness is engineered into useful infrastructure. He thinks subjects should be observed. Then his existence becomes a network of cameras and monitors. But he never experiences the moral revelation a more conventional story might give him. Sawyer does not wake as the Doctor and repent. He adapts. That is what makes him more frightening. Transformation does not create morality. Suffering does not guarantee empathy. Harley remains Harley because the qualities that made him dangerous were not physical. He valued intellect without humility, control without consent, results without mercy. A mechanical existence gives those traits more reach. Then Chapter 5's backup proves even destroying his active brain is not enough. Sawyer understood redundancy. A copy exists because knowledge this valuable should not disappear. The company's obsession with preservation once again defeats ordinary death, and it leaves the player staring at the face of a man they already killed. Dewey represents the opposite lesson. 3 minds inside one body should be an impossible recipe for instability. Yet Dewey spends years building something humane. This proves that experimental design does not dictate destiny. He is literally more fragmented than most bigger bodies, but he creates more community than almost any of them. Matthew, Jack, and Kevin do not make him evil. The catastrophe comes when the prototype deliberately creates a loss severe enough to overwhelm the balance. The distinction matters. Dewey is not a failed experiment because he has multiple personalities. He is a person placed under unbearable grief. His monstrous transformation is a breakdown, not his true self finally being revealed. That is why his apology matters. The compassionate Dewey was real. The rage was real too. Neither cancels the other. Playtime Co would reduce both to behavioral outcomes. The player has to live with them as parts of a person. Poppy and the prototype deserve to be examined together because almost every major event after the player's return is shaped by the argument between them. They share an origin point. Elliot, Ludwig. They share unusual biology. They share a history older than the bigger body's initiative. They share knowledge of what Playtime Co. really became. And they share an inability to live ordinary human lives ever again. That should make them natural allies. For a time, some form of connection clearly existed. The prototype can speak to Poppy through the Ollie identity with enough familiarity that she trusts the voice years later. He knows how to reach her emotionally. She believes Ollie is someone worth caring about. That trust is not created in Chapter 3. It comes from history. This makes the reveal in Chapter 4 much crueler than a simple fake phone call twist. The prototype is weaponizing a relationship that was real in another form. Ollie is not a completely invented child. Ollie is the child experiment 1006 believes Elliot destroyed. When Poppy cares about Ollie, she is caring about the person buried inside the monster. The prototype uses that care to manipulate her. There is something almost self-destructive about the choice. He wants Poppy to come home. He also uses the part of himself she loves as evidence that she should never trust him. This contradiction makes sense if Experiment 1006's identity is built around resentment. Oliver does not want to be treated as Elliot's boy, but the prototype cannot stop carrying Oliver's desires. He wants family. He wants Poppy. He wants someone who understands immortality. He wants a better place. He wants acknowledgement that what happened to him mattered. He wants to prove that Elliot's world was wrong. Those are human needs expressed through monstrous control. Poppy wants something different. She wants the cycle to end. At first, that means escape. Then it becomes revenge. Then destruction. Her decision to redirect the train in Chapter 2 is the first major sign that leaving the factory is not enough for her. She could help the player escape and remain behind. Instead, she keeps the one capable outsider inside the mission. Why? Because Poppy has likely spent years knowing what the prototype is capable of while being physically unable to stop him. Imagine being conscious in the case, unable to move freely, knowing the factory above and below contains victims, knowing the being who imprisoned you controls the remnants, waiting for someone strong enough to create an opening. Then the player arrives and survives Huggy. From Poppy's perspective, this is not an ordinary former employee. It is an opportunity she may never receive again. That desperation explains the train decision. It does not make it fair. Chapter 3 finally allows Poppy to explain the scale of what she wants to stop. The Hour of Joy tape is her evidence. She is not asking the player to trust a vague claim that the prototype is evil. She shows the massacre. She explains that innocent people died. The mission now has moral weight beyond Poppy's imprisonment. But even then, Poppy's solution becomes increasingly absolute. By safe haven, she is willing to destroy Playtime Co. itself. This is where her trauma collides with other survivors' needs. Poppy sees the factory as a machine that must be ended. Dewey sees it as the only available shelter for his family. Both are right about something. The building is the source of the nightmare. The building is also where the victims live. Destroying a prison while prisoners are still inside is not automatically liberation. The prototype exploits the disagreement because he understands Poppy's weakness. She thinks in end states. Kill him. Destroy the factory. Finish the nightmare. Experiment 1006 thinks in relationships and leverage. Who trusts whom? Who can be moved? Who can be frightened? What happens if Dewey leaves safe haven? What happens if the player touches the generator? What happens if Poppy believes Ollie? The prototype is better at manipulating the present. Poppy is better at imagining an end. This is why she repeatedly needs the player. The protagonist solves immediate problems she cannot solve physically. Chapter 5 changes her again. Her apology is a sign that she is learning from the damage around her. A character who never questions her own manipulation would become a smaller version of the prototype. Poppy instead begins to acknowledge that using people has consequences. Then the Tea Party forces her to confront Experiment 1006 directly. Their argument is no longer mediated through CatNap, Ollie, or old tapes. The prototype stands in front of her. Poppy asks about the children. That choice tells us where her priorities are. She does not begin by asking why he imprisoned her. She asks what he did to the orphans. The answer horrifies her. The prototype's response suggests he sees what he did as part of his larger philosophy, rather than meaningless cruelty. This is where the phrase, "everything dies, except us," becomes the heart of his worldview. Mortality separates him from everyone else. People disappear. Employees die. Followers die. CatNap dies. Mommy dies. Safe haven dies. But Experiment 1006 and Poppy remain. Immortality has convinced him that the two of them belong to a category of existence above ordinary relationships. If everyone else is temporary, why organize eternity around temporary people? That is the logic Poppy refuses. She cares about mortal lives precisely because they end? The prototype seems to respond by making permanence the greater value. This is a philosophical split created by the same scientific miracle. Poppy's immortality deepens empathy. The prototype's immortality deepens detachment. Again, the difference is not guaranteed by the experiment. It comes from what they choose to do with the condition. The prototype calls Poppy broken because she will not accept his logic. He wants to fix her. That is the final proof that he has become like the people who made him. Elliot looked at death and saw a condition to fix. Sawyer looked at human labor and saw a cost to fix. Playtime Co. looked at resistant children and saw behavior to fix. The prototype looks at Poppy's disagreement and sees Poppy to fix. The person becomes the problem instead of the plan being questioned. Poppy calls him a monster because, from her perspective, Oliver's suffering has not taught him to value freedom. It has taught him to demand that everyone understand his pain on his terms. Yet the prototype still refuses to simply kill her. He damages her, takes her, chases her, imprisons her, but destruction is not his preferred outcome. He wants recognition. That makes Poppy uniquely powerful against him, even when physically helpless. She can deny the story he tells himself. CatNap's worship says, "You saved us?" Poppy says, "You slaughtered them." The prototype says, "Better place?" Poppy says, "Monster." The conflict is partly a battle over memory. What was the hour of joy? Freedom or massacre? What was Elliot's experiment? Family or betrayal? What is the factory? Home or prison? What is immortality? Salvation or curse? What is Poppy? Sister, project, ally, prisoner, or independent person? The prototype keeps trying to choose the answers. Poppy keeps refusing. That is why the player matters so much. The protagonist is a witness not created inside their family conflict. Yes, the player worked for Playtime Co. Yes, guilt connects them to the company. But the player is not Elliot. They are not Oliver. They are not Poppy. They can see the consequences without sharing the exact original wound. This outsider-insider status makes the protagonist the only character capable of moving between factions. Employees would fear the toys. Toys hate employees. Poppy needs help. Safe Haven distrusts destructive plans. The doctor wants a subject. The prototype wants a piece. The player can interact with all of them because nobody fully knows what category to place them in. Former employee, intruder. Angel, killer, ally, tool, survivor, possibly. After Chapter 5, experiment. The uncertainty around the protagonist is not a missing feature. It is structurally useful. A fully defined identity too early would lock the player into one moral side. Instead, each character projects something onto them. Mommy sees an employee. DogDay sees Poppy's angel. Dewey sees a possible ally. Sawyer sees an interesting test subject. Poppy sees the person capable of finishing her plan. The prototype sees someone useful enough to keep moving. The player's actual self remains behind all those interpretations. Chapter 5 may be preparing to change that. The Poppy Gel sequence is not just a resurrection, it is the first time the protagonist becomes physically entangled with the company's foundational technology. Before that moment, the player uses experimental systems from the outside. After the vat, the process may be inside them. If the gel has permanently altered the protagonist, then the line between former employee and experiment has collapsed. That would be thematically perfect. The person who returns to uncover what Playtime Co did eventually becomes part of the same scientific problem. But until a later chapter confirms the exact consequences, we should stop at what Chapter 5 actually shows. The player suffers a fatal or near-fatal attack. The prototype places them into Poppy Gel, consciousness returns. Giblet helps them wake. They continue despite catastrophic injury. Anything beyond that is theory. And that distinction between canon and theory is especially important in Poppy Playtime because the franchise deliberately trains its audience to speculate. A hand becomes 100 theories. A phone voice becomes 100 identities. A corpse becomes a family tree. Some theories eventually become true. Others do not. For years, the prototype being Elliot was a popular possibility. Chapter 5 rejects it. For years, Ollie could be imagined as a hidden child survivor. Chapter 4 reveals the deception, and Chapter 5 reveals the deeper truth that Ollie is not a random, stolen voice but Oliver's own identity. The correct approach is therefore not to avoid theory, it is to mark the border. The missing orphans remain unresolved in detail. The player's identity remains unresolved. The ultimate purpose of the prototype's continued experimentation remains partially unresolved. The precise limits of Poppy Gel remain unresolved. The final status of Huggy and Kissy remains uncertain. Poppy's location after the ending is unknown beyond being taken by Experiment 1006. Sawyer's exact next move is unknown. Chapter 6 exists as a future continuation. not as information we can safely invent. Everything else should be built from what the first 5 chapters actually establish, and what they establish is already enormous. The smaller experiments and secondary threats matter because they reveal what Playtime Co. considered failure. Take Boxy Boo. Experiment 1160 represents a milestone for Harley Sawyer because the Bigger Bodies initiative needed proof that a giant living mascot could function as intended. Boxy succeeds where earlier neurological experiments failed. The response should have been to recognize that a living consciousness existed inside an artificial body. Instead, Sawyer immediately thinks about application. Appetite can be shaped. Violence can be directed. A creature can eliminate leaks. This tells us the program is morally compromised before Huggy, Mommy, or CatNap are assigned their famous roles. The problem was never one later scientist going too far. The project's business model required dehumanization from the beginning. Pianosaurus shows a different category. Not every bigger body reaches the standards Sawyer wants. Some are considered crude, unstable, limited, or disappointing. But failure does not mean the experiment ceases to be alive. That creates a horrifying question the company rarely treats as moral. What happens to an unsuccessful living toy? A failed toaster can be scrapped. A failed experiment can feel the scrapping. Chapter 4's prison is full of evidence that Playtime Co. accumulated beings it could neither safely use nor simply release. Containment becomes the answer. The shelf, the prison, and the lower facilities are therefore not only secret because the company fears discovery. They are warehouses for unresolved ethical disasters. Yarnaby belongs to this environment because the creature's value is relational. Sawyer may not consider Yarnaby a broad success in the same way as Huggy, but he can create loyalty intense enough to make the experiment useful personally. That is another sign the program has stopped pretending its goals are limited to toys or labor. Researchers are shaping minds to satisfy their own control. Nightmare critters and other hostile creatures in the lower levels expand the post-company ecosystem. Some experiments were based on commercial lines. Some were altered versions. Some became feral. Some survived by eating others. The important lore point is that toy stops being a single biological category once the Bigger Bodies initiative scales. Different materials behave differently. Elastic plastic gives Mommy extraordinary movement. CatNap's pulmonary system distributes gas. Dewey's dough body can reshape itself and reacts catastrophically to freezing. The prototype combines mechanical and organic elements. The company is effectively inventing species one product line at a time. There is no long-term ecological plan. That failure becomes deadly after the hour of joy. Imagine releasing dozens of artificially designed organisms into one sealed building. Some need meat. Some can digest toy tissue. Some are tiny enough to swarm. Some are territorial. Some release chemicals. Some were designed around aggression. Some were emotionally dependent on specific handlers who are now dead. The post-1995 factory becomes an ecosystem no scientist ever intended to sustain itself. Cannibalism is therefore not simply evidence that the toys are monsters. It is an expected consequence of design without responsibility. Playtime Co. created hungry bodies and then vanished. The prototype's ability to survive without ordinary food makes the inequality even worse. He can rule through a famine he does not experience. Mommy's comment about other creatures finally being able to eat during the game station sequences hints at how important hunger has become. The player sees bodies hanging, discarded toys, and creatures attacking one another across chapters. What looks like environmental gore is often the history of 10 years without a food system. Miss Delight's story is perhaps the clearest. She and the other teacher experiments are trapped. Food disappears. The civilized role of educator collapses under starvation. The sisters turn on one another. The final survivor emerges with a completely different relationship to hunger and violence. There is no need for the prototype to hypnotize her. The environment does the work. This is important because it prevents us from blaming every post-hour of joy horror directly on Experiment 1006. The prototype is responsible for the massacre and much of the later tyranny. But Playtime Co. is responsible for constructing a population that could not safely survive the freedom he created. The revolution happens inside a trap. That is why the hour of joy cannot be evaluated only by asking whether the employees deserved punishment. Even if every guilty scientist vanished, the experiments would still be sealed inside bodies designed around company functions. Destroying the master does not automatically dismantle the master's system. The factory itself remains. CatNap still produces red smoke. Mommy still has a body adapted to the game station. Dewey still contains 3 minds. The doctor still inhabits infrastructure. The children, if alive, still need protection. Poppy and the prototype still carry the consequences of Elliot's work. Liberation requires more than opening the cells. It requires building a life afterward. Safe Haven is the only major faction we see attempting that. This is what makes its destruction arguably more important than another boss death. Safe Haven is proof of concept for freedom, not scientific proof, social proof. Living toys can create a nonviolent community. They can define themselves outside product functions. They can choose relationships not assigned by the company. Dewey does not operate a game station because his body is flexible. He helps build a refuge. The toys inside do not need customers. They need one another. The prototype destroys that experiment in freedom. Afterward, the lower factory loses evidence that another future was possible. Giblet and Chum carry the idea forward in Chapter 5 on a smaller scale. They survive through mutual aid. They possess information the prototype does not fully control. They help the player without demanding worship. Their rebellion is less dramatic than the Hour of Joy and more sustainable in one important sense. They focus on a specific target. Find the weakness. Protect the survivors. Stop Experiment 1006. This is a more mature form of resistance than indiscriminate destruction. Poppy gradually moves toward it after Safe Haven fails. Instead of detonating the entire factory, Chapter 5's group searches for a compound capable of neutralizing the prototype. That change is easy to miss. Poppy's earlier plan is total destruction. Giblet's plan is targeted. The narrative itself appears to be learning from Dewey's objection. Do not kill everyone to stop one ruler. Find the thing that makes the ruler vulnerable. The negation compound is therefore morally important as well as scientifically important. A precise solution becomes possible. The master backup is supposed to lead toward that precision. Then Sawyer appears, making the solution complicated again. This is classic Playtime Co. Every useful discovery contains a person someone tried to reduce to a tool. The player now needs information. Sawyer is information. The temptation will be to treat him as a tool. But Sawyer is dangerous precisely because he understands what happens when people become useful to one another without trust. He can bargain. He can lie. He can withhold. A digital body may limit him physically, but intelligence was always his most dangerous weapon. The Outimoles give the prototype a parallel role. Experiment 1006 is also experimenting. Restricted material around Chapter 5 shows him combining bodies and creating altered forms. He calls some transformations honors or punishments depending on the subject and context. This means his concept of a better place may involve transformation rather than ordinary rescue. It also means the prototype has crossed a line that destroys any remaining distinction between his methods and the company's Playtime Co. Said, "We can improve your function." The prototype says, "I can make you part of something else." Both claim authority over bodies. The grotesque wrong-side Outimoles visualize that claim. They look like toys whose identities have been turned inside out because that is essentially what the prototype does psychologically. He takes what something was built to be and reconstructs it according to his own judgment. The jester form he wears becomes meaningful in this context. A jester traditionally performs roles, mocks authority, and destabilizes order. The prototype does all three. He begins as Elliot's test, becomes the company's prisoner, mocks the idea of control by repeatedly escaping, overthrows Playtime Co., then becomes his own ruler while still wearing a form associated with performance. His body is a contradiction, part human, part machine, part scavenged toy, part symbol. He has no single mascot identity because he exists before and beyond the company's later system of assigning people clean commercial shells. That makes him visually honest in a way Huggy is not. Huggy's body hides horror behind plush fur. The prototype looks like the procedure. Exposed structure, borrowed components, unresolved identity, a living draft that was never meant to become the final product. The prototype makes himself final anyway. And Chapter 5's deepest irony is that after all his evolution, the thing most capable of stopping him may be stored in an old company backup. The corporation he destroyed still contains the instructions for unmaking him. That means Playtime Co. continues exercising power over its victims even after death. The labels, the experiment numbers, the weaknesses, the formulas, the records, everything the characters know about themselves is partly stored in the language of the people who use them. Poppy wants to escape that history. The prototype wants to dominate it. Sawyer wants to preserve it. The player keeps uncovering it. None of them can simply ignore it. That is why tapes and documents are so central to Poppy Playtime storytelling. The past is not background. It is an active weapon. A tape can change an alliance. A record can reveal a weakness. A forgotten voice can expose an identity. The Hour of Joy footage turns Poppy's revenge into a moral mission. The Elliot and Prototype recording turns a monster into Oliver. The master backup turns Sawyer from dead antagonist into future problem. Knowledge moves the plot because the factory was built on secrets. Every reveal reduces someone's ability to control the story. Playtime Co. called the experiments products. The documents reveal they were people. The prototype called the Hour of Joy salvation. The footage reveals massacre. Ollie called himself a helper. Chapter 4 reveals experiment 1006. The prototype presents himself as something beyond death. The negation research reveals vulnerability. The story advances whenever propaganda loses a layer. By the end of Chapter 5, the remaining mysteries are no longer random questions. They are concentrated around a few unresolved pieces that could redefine the entire story again. The first is the letter that brings the player back. Someone wanted a former employee inside Playtime Co. The message claims the missing staff are still there and points toward the Poppy. That instruction ultimately leads to Poppy's case. So who benefits from Poppy being released? Poppy obviously benefits. The prototype's later manipulation raises the possibility that he could benefit too. Other survivors might have wanted an outsider capable of disrupting the existing hierarchy. The game has not conclusively given us the sender in a way that closes every alternative. The safest interpretation is therefore functional rather than personal. The letter is the first move in a plan that requires the player to find Poppy. Its exact author remains part of the mystery. This matters because if Experiment 106 somehow helped engineer the player's return, then chapters 1 through 5 could represent an even larger manipulation than the Ollie reveal already proves. On the other hand, if Poppy or her allies arranged it, then freeing her is the intended objective and the prototype merely adapts afterward. The story has evidence for manipulation from multiple sides, so declaring an answer too early would flatten one of the remaining tensions. The second mystery is the protagonist. Chapter 5 intensifies the language of conscience. The factory addresses the player almost as though coming back was inevitable once guilt became strong enough. What did they feel guilty about? Being absent when coworkers died? Leaving before the Hour of Joy without warning anyone? Knowing something suspicious about Playtime Co? Participating indirectly in a department connected to the experiments? The player's competence can support many theories. They use grab pack systems easily. They understand factory infrastructure. They survive complex maintenance environments, but former employment alone explains much of that. The game has not yet provided a name and role that should be treated as settled canon. This uncertainty is useful because the player's moral position depends on it. If they were an innocent low-level employee who happened to miss work, the journey is rescue and discovery. If they knew about the experiments and left others behind, the journey becomes penance. If they actively participated, it becomes something closer to judgment. The resurrection in Poppy Gel raises a new possibility beyond all three. Whatever they were when they entered, they may not be fully ordinary anymore. The third mystery is the phrase, "get up." The words appear repeatedly around death and survival. They create the impression of an intelligence refusing to let the player's story end. Sometimes the phrase functions like a game mechanic. Sometimes it feels connected to the prototype's influence. Chapter 5 makes it physically real when the player returns from a fatal encounter. One possibility is that the repeated wording has always foreshadowed the deeper rule of Playtime Co. Science. Death is not necessarily permanent here. Another is that a specific being has been pushing the protagonist forward. The prototype's decision to place the player in Poppy Gel makes him an obvious suspect in at least the final instance, but intent remains uncertain. If he wanted the player dead, there were simpler places to leave the body. If he wanted the player restored, then the apparent killing becomes another controlled experiment. Why? Perhaps he needs someone to activate the master backup. Perhaps he wants Sawyer restored. Perhaps he wants the player changed by the gel. Perhaps he believes they can reach something he cannot. Perhaps he simply knows that the story has another use for them. The prototype has already demonstrated that apparent setbacks can be part of longer plans. Safe Haven proves it. The Ollie identity proves it. So his strangest action in Chapter 5 should not be dismissed as carelessness. The fourth mystery is the orphans. This may be the most important unresolved moral question. The Hour of Joy is partly justified by its participants as liberation from experimentation. CatNap protects children during the immediate chaos. Poppy cares about their fate. The prototype moves them. Later evidence makes his better place sound far more sinister than a hidden dormitory. His conversation with Poppy implies that her hope for them is incompatible with what he has done. Some material strongly suggests death. Other details about continued experimentation, transformation, and immortality leave open questions about what death means inside the labs. If the children were killed, why? Mercy? Control? An attempt to spare them future experimentation? A step in some immortal project? If they were transformed, what are they now? If only some died, where are the rest? Chapter 5 moves the mystery closer to an answer without resolving every individual fate. What matters for the current story is Poppy's reaction. Whatever the prototype calls a better place, she sees the outcome as monstrous. The 5th mystery is the prototype's ultimate goal. Revenge cannot explain everything. Playtime Co. is already dead as an institution inside the factory. Most employees are gone. The executives no longer control him. If revenge were the only objective, the hour of joy would have completed it. Yet Experiment 1006 continues experimenting, collecting bodies, controlling survivors, searching for escaped toys, manipulating Poppy, and preserving an ideology around a better place. He is building towards something. Immortality appears central. He emphasizes that he and Poppy do not die like others. He uses Poppy gel. He seems interested in forms capable of surviving ordinary destruction. His altered creations suggest he may be trying to improve or remake other toys according to his own standards. One interpretation is that the prototype wants to solve loneliness by creating more beings like himself and Poppy. If mortality means everyone eventually leaves, create companions who cannot. This would connect perfectly to his fear of infinity being lonely. It would also turn Elliot's original mistake into the prototype's final project. Elliot refused to accept Poppy's death and violated Oliver to defeat loss. The prototype refuses to accept eternal loneliness and may be violating others to create permanent companions. The victim repeats the father's logic, not because he becomes Elliot literally, because he inherits the fear that drove Elliot. Loss. That is much more tragic. The 6th mystery is Poppy gel itself. Early research presents poppy-based material as a route toward reanimation. Chapter 5 makes regenerative and restorative properties central. The prototype carries or consumes enormous amounts of it. Poppy's existence depends on the older process. The player can return after immersion. But the gel is not a magic potion with simple rules. Different formulas, compounds, growth media, and experimental procedures are implied. The negation compound can potentially neutralize the system that keeps Experiment 1006 functioning. This suggests Poppy playtime science has a balance: creation and negation, restoration and neutralization. The company did not discover one supernatural substance. It developed a field of biotechnology around altered life. That distinction matters for the future. If the player can access the correct formula, killing the prototype may not require destroying his body piece by piece. The regenerative cycle can be interrupted. But what happens to Poppy if the same underlying technology supports her? Could a compound that neutralizes 1006 also threaten 1007? Could the player now be vulnerable after exposure to the gel? Could Sawyer manipulate the formula to preserve himself? The solution may contain another moral trap. The 7th mystery is Huggy and Kissy. Chapter 5 gives them a moment that feels like closure. They reconnect. The prototype attacks. Their bodies disappear from the immediate aftermath. The simplest reading is death, but Poppy Playtime has spent 5 chapters teaching us that bodies can survive impossible damage and that the prototype actively collects remains. Huggy survived the fall. Kissy survived severe injury before. Poppy survives damage to her porcelain head. The player dies and returns. So certainty is dangerous. Even if Huggy and Kissy are biologically dead, the prototype may still use their bodies. His existing form already incorporates parts associated with experiments he has harvested. Their story could therefore continue in a horrifying way even without personal survival. The emotional question is whether the moment of reconciliation was their final act as themselves. If so, it is complete. If not, Chapter 6 has an opportunity to ask whether identity can survive one more round of physical reconstruction. The 8th mystery is Harley Sawyer's backup. Is a backup the same person? The game intentionally makes that question difficult. Sawyer's consciousness already survived transformation from human body to experimental system. Now, a stored version activates after the active one has been destroyed. If the backup contains memories only up to a certain point, then this Sawyer may not remember everything. The Doctor experienced in Chapter 4. If it contains a more recent synchronized state, then he may know the player killed him. Either possibility changes the relationship. A backup from before the Hour of Joy might possess information the later Doctor had, but a different political position. A later backup could carry the same grudges. The ending gives us his personality immediately enough to recognize Harley, but not enough to know what version of Harley we are dealing with. This is exactly the kind of immortality problem the story loves. Continuity without certainty. The 9th mystery is Poppy's condition after being taken. The prototype damages her at the tea party but does not destroy her. Later, he captures her after the player's death. His repeated behavior suggests imprisonment, persuasion, or transformation is more likely than simple execution. He wants Poppy to understand him. He wants her home. He wants her fixed. Those desires make her survival likely in the immediate narrative sense, but they also make her vulnerable to something worse than death: conditioning, alteration, forced participation. Poppy spent years in a case because the prototype could not make her agree. Chapter 5 ends with him finally holding her again after the player has been removed. Whatever comes next will probably test whether her identity can survive another attempt to control it. The 10th mystery is whether the factory can have a future at all. Poppy wants to destroy it. Dewey wants to preserve the people inside. The prototype wants to own it. Sawyer's systems still exist. Giblet and other survivors need somewhere to live. The outside world presumably does not understand what is below the abandoned company. Even if Experiment 1006 is defeated tomorrow, the problem remains. Hundreds of rooms, experimental compounds, living toys, human remains, potential surviving children or transformed descendants, dangerous technology, corporate records, a building capable of producing red smoke and restorative materials. There is no clean ending where one monster dies and everyone walks into sunlight. Some experiments may not survive outside. Some may terrify the public. Governments would want the technology, corporations would want the formulas, scientists would want the bodies. The cycle could simply begin again outside Playtime Co. That may be why Dewey's question is more important than it first appears. What do we waste if we destroy everything just to kill the prototype? The answer is not only toys, it is the possibility that the victims can define what happens next, and that possibility is what the first 5 chapters have been fighting toward without ever naming it directly. Who owns the future of the experiments? The company says the company. The prototype says the prototype. Poppy risks saying the mission. Dewey says the survivors. The player has not answered yet. Even the chapter titles trace the evolution of the story. A tight squeeze sounds almost playful. It refers to Huggy's embrace, the narrow vents, and the immediate physical danger of being trapped. The threat is close to the body. Something is chasing you. Escape the room. Escape the vent. Survive the mascot. Fly in a web expands the trap. The player is no longer simply being chased through corridors. Mommy constructs a system of games and rules around them. A fly does not lose to a spider because the spider is faster in open space. It loses because the environment has already been designed to catch it. That is Playtime Co in miniature. Children move through a system whose purpose they do not understand. Employees move through departments without seeing the whole company. Experiments move through roles assigned before they can choose. The player enters the game station believing the train offers freedom and discovers that every route is controlled by someone else. Deep sleep moves the trap into the mind. Playcare is built around sleeping children, catnap, red smoke, dreams, hallucinations, memory, and the buried truth of the hour of joy. Sleep can mean comfort. It can mean chemical control. It can mean the temporary absence of consciousness. In a franchise obsessed with whether consciousness can survive death, sleep becomes a perfect metaphor. A sleeping person looks gone but can wake. A dead person should not. Playtime Co spends its history erasing the difference. CatNap puts people into states where reality becomes uncertain. Poppy has spent years awake inside confinement. The prototype and Poppy exist because Elliot refused to accept the deepest sleep as permanent. Safe Haven then shifts the title from condition to place. For once, the story introduces something worth protecting rather than escaping. A haven. The word is hopeful. That hope becomes the tragedy. The chapter does not call itself the prison or the doctor because the most important event is not Sawyer's death. It is the destruction of the alternative community. By naming the chapter Safe Haven, the story tells us what actually matters before we understand why. The player can defeat the doctor and still lose the chapter. Safe Haven dies. Dewey dies. Poppy's plan fails. The prototype wins strategically. Then Broken Things describes both body and world. Everything entering Chapter 5 has been damaged by previous events. The player falls. Kissy is mutilated. Huggy is scarred. Poppy's alliance is fractured. The factory is descending into increasingly unstable systems. The title also reaches backward. The Bigger Bodies Initiative is a factory for broken continuity. Children become products, people become experiments, families become procedures, bodies become parts, memories become conditioning targets. The prototype thinks broken things should be remade according to his judgment. Lily lives among literal and psychological fragments. The player searches through reclamation areas. The master backup exists because even data is expected to break and require restoration. By the end, the protagonist is physically broken and reanimated. Poppy is damaged and captured. Huggy and Kissy are broken together. Sawyer returns as a copy. The chapter title describes the entire mythology, and the progression of titles shows the camera pulling farther back. Chapter 1, I am trapped. Chapter 2, the environment is a trap. Chapter 3, memory and perception are traps. Chapter 4, safety itself can be destroyed. Chapter 5, everyone has been shaped by what broke them. The eventual ending of Poppy Playtime will have to answer whether broken things can become something new without being fixed by another controller. That word, fixed, deserves attention because it appears in different forms across the story. A scientist fixes an experiment. A company fixes inefficiency. The prototype wants to fix Poppy. A mechanic fixes machinery. The player constantly fixes power systems, doors, generators, trains, and networks. But people are not machines. Every time the franchise applies repair language to a person, danger follows. The correct alternative may be healing. Healing requires the person to remain the subject of their own life. Repair treats the person as an object returned to function. Playtime Co. repairs safe, Haven tries to heal. That difference is why Dewey's community matters so much even after it is gone. It gives the story a moral reference point. Without Safe Haven, we might think the only choices are Poppy's destruction or the prototype's rule. Safe Haven proves the victims can organize around care instead. Giblet carries a piece of that philosophy into Chapter 5. He is frightened. He is not a flawless hero. He does not dominate the room. He helps anyway. That kind of courage is important in a franchise full of giant bodies and dramatic monsters. The company measured worth through performance. Fast child, strong child, smart child, useful experiment, optimal outcome. Giblet represents worth without optimization. He matters because he chooses to help. Chum matters for similar reasons. Survival may require deception inside the prototype's domain, but deception does not automatically make someone malicious. The franchise distinguishes manipulation for domination from secrecy for survival. The prototype lies to make others serve his plan. Chum hides and negotiates because open resistance would get people killed. Context matters. Poppy's lies occupy the uncomfortable space between those extremes. She deceives the player for a goal she believes is necessary. Her arc is partly about learning that noble purpose does not erase the need for consent. By Chapter 5, the story has enough moral complexity that almost no major character fits one category. Huggy is killer and victim. Mommy is killer and victim. CatNap is protector, torturer, disciple, and child. Dewey is guardian and final antagonist. Poppy is ally and manipulator. The prototype is victim, liberator, murderer, ruler, brother, and experimenter. Sawyer is victim of transformation and architect of transformation. The player is survivor and serial destroyer of experiments. Only the company's institutional behavior remains consistently clear. It turns complexity into categories because categories are easier to manage. That is why learning human names is such a powerful act in the lore. Marie Payne, Theodore Grambell, Jack Ayers, Kevin Barnes, Matthew Hallard, Oliver, Poppy Ludwig. The names break the mascot surface. They remind us that Mommy Longlegs died is not the entire sentence. Marie Payne had already died once in another sense when the company converted and conditioned her. CatNap was killed is not the whole sentence. Theodore's identity had been eroded years earlier. The prototype attacked is not the whole sentence. Oliver's pain is moving the claws. Human names do not excuse what the experiments do. They restore context. That is exactly what Playtime Co. removed. Experiment numbers have the opposite function. 1006, 1170, 1088, 1020-22, 1322, 3354. Numbers make suffering administratively clean. A number can be placed in a report. A number can be transferred. A number can be evaluated. A number can fail. The story gradually replaces numbers with names as we descend. That movement is another form of uncovering truth. At the surface, we meet mascots. In documents, we meet experiments. In the deepest lore, we meet people. The order matters. Horror gets more personal the closer we get to the origin. This is why Chapter 5 needed to reveal Oliver. The prototype had already become physically terrifying. A bigger monster design could not make him more meaningful. A human name could. Once he is Oliver, every action carries history. The jester is no longer an unknowable machine. He is a person who decided Ollie was gone and built an identity around what remained. That does not make him less frightening. It makes the fear intimate. The monster knows what family means. He simply cannot separate family from possession anymore. And Poppy is the person forced to live inside that contradiction. That contradiction gives us a better way to understand the Hour of Joy. Because the massacre is the point where every version of Playtime Co story collides. For the executives who built the system, the Hour of Joy is a security failure. For the workers trapped inside the building, it is an apocalypse. For the experiments, it is a revolution. For Poppy, it is a catastrophe committed by people she can understand and still cannot forgive. For the prototype, it is proof that the factory can finally be taken away from the humans who made it. And for the player, arriving years later, it is an inherited crime scene. Those perspectives cannot be flattened into one moral answer. The experiments had every reason to hate Playtime Co. They had been imprisoned, modified, tested, separated from their old identities, and treated as equipment. Many of them had once been children. Others retained enough human memory to understand what had been stolen from them. Some were forced into roles designed to make the factory more efficient. Some were displayed to children while scientists watched from behind the walls. Some were punished for disobedience. Some were simply failures that remained alive long enough to know they had failed somebody else's test. If the Hour of Joy had been an escape in which the experiments broke their cages and fled, it would be easy to describe it as liberation. But that is not what happened. The prototype coordinated an extermination. The violence reached employees who knew about the experiments, and employees who may have known almost nothing. It reached scientists, guards, administrators, technicians, and ordinary people who happened to be inside the factory when the uprising began. The experiments did not distinguish cleanly between the architects of the system and everybody standing near them. That is why Poppy's reaction matters. She does not deny that Playtime Co. was monstrous. She knows what was done beneath the cheerful public face of the company. She has more reason than almost anyone to despise the institution. Yet she still describes the Hour of Joy as something that should never have happened. Her position is not that the company deserved to survive. Her position is that suffering does not automatically make every act of revenge righteous. This is where Poppy and the prototype become philosophical opposites. The prototype sees the factory as a conflict between captors and captives. Once that line is drawn, the people on the other side become acceptable casualties. Poppy sees individuals. That does not make her gentle in every situation. By Chapter 4, she is willing to destroy the entire factory if she believes it is the only way to stop the prototype. She can be manipulative. She withholds information. She pushes the player forward even when the path is lethal. But she still resists the idea that everyone can be reduced to a side. The prototype does the opposite. He turns categories into moral permission. Human, employee, heretic, threat, useful, broken, family. Each label determines what can be done to the person beneath it. That habit did not begin with him. Playtime Co. taught it. The company classified children by performance. It classified experiments by number. It classified living beings by success rate. It classified suffering as an operational cost. The prototype simply learns the language of the institution and uses it against its creators. That is why the Hour of Joy does not truly destroy Playtime Co.'s logic. It destroys the people running Playtime Co.'s. The logic survives. There is still a hierarchy. There are still punishments. There is still experimentation. There are still bodies being repurposed. There is still a central authority deciding who is allowed to live where. There is still a distinction between useful creatures and disposable ones. The ruler changes. The structure remains recognizable. That is the tragedy of the toy society after the massacre. The experiments finally possess the factory, but possession is not the same thing as freedom. They inherit a sealed industrial complex designed to control them. They inherit hunger. They inherit trauma. They inherit a population made from incompatible bodies and damaged minds. They inherit a leader whose idea of protection increasingly resembles ownership, and they inherit no normal world to return to. Imagine what escape would actually mean for a creature like Mommy Longlegs. Where would she go? What city could accept her? What legal identity would she have? What body would society say belongs to her? Could Marie Payne simply walk outside and resume a human life, even if she remembered everything? The world beyond the factory would see the toy before it saw the person. The same problem applies to Huggy, Kissy, CatNap, Doey, and almost every bigger body. Playtime Co. did not merely imprison them physically. It made their captivity portable. Their bodies are evidence of what was done. Even an unlocked door cannot restore the life they lost. This may be one reason the prototype's revolution turns inward instead of outward. The factory becomes the only world in which these beings can imagine belonging. That world is horrible, but it is theirs. The corridors built to hold them become territory. The laboratories become ruins. The mascots become tribes. The old company becomes mythology, and the prototype becomes the authority capable of organizing the survivors. That authority is useful at first. The hour of joy required coordination. Survival after the hour of joy also required coordination. Food had to be found. Dangerous experiments had to be controlled. Children still present in the facility had to be dealt with somehow. Different creatures had to coexist. The problem is that emergency authority has a way of becoming permanent. The prototype does not simply help the toys survive the transition. He becomes the center of the new order. CatNap worships him. Other creatures fear him. Bodies are collected for his use. Those who resist can become examples. Poppy is imprisoned, and by the time the player returns, the factory is no longer a liberated space. It is a kingdom of survivors living inside the machinery of their old prison. The irony is brutal. Playtime Co. wanted to build workers who never needed wages, never complained, and never left. After the hour of joy, many of those workers still never leave. The corporation is dead. Its architecture wins anyway. That is why location matters so much in Poppy Playtime. Every chapter takes us deeper, but the descent is not only geographic, it is historical. The lobby belongs to the public story. The game station belongs to recruitment and testing. Playcare belongs to the hidden supply of children. The prison belongs to control. The laboratories belong to transformation. The data center belongs to memory. The farther down we travel, the less the factory looks like a toy company and the more it looks like a civilization designed around converting human life into proprietary technology. At the surface, Playtime Co. sells imagination. Below the surface, it measures it. Deeper still, it conditions it. Then it modifies the body carrying it. Finally, it stores the results as data. The building itself tells the history of the company. You can almost read its morality by floor. The bright spaces are where consent is performed. The dark spaces are where consent becomes irrelevant. The lobby asks you to love the toys. The game station asks children to play. Playcare asks them to trust adults. The labs stop asking. That progression explains why the factory remains frightening even when no monster is present. The architecture knows what happened. A colorful wall beside a reinforced door is not just visual contrast. It is evidence of two audiences. One audience was meant to see joy. The other was never meant to leave. And the player moves between those audiences because they once belonged to the company. That fact makes the journey different from the perspective of an outsider. The player recognizes procedures. They know how to use industrial equipment quickly. They understand the grab pack. They navigate systems that would be absurdly dangerous to an ordinary visitor. Most importantly, the story repeatedly treats their absence during the hour of joy as meaningful. They were supposed to be there. They were not. That absence may have saved their life. It may also be the reason guilt follows them into the factory. The opening message does not promise treasure. It does not say the company is reopening. It says the missing employees are still there. For somebody who escaped the day everyone else vanished, that sentence would be almost impossible to ignore. If the player left under ordinary circumstances before the massacre, the message offers closure. If they avoided work that day for a specific reason, it offers accusation. If they knew something was wrong and chose not to act, it offers judgment. The game still refused to tell us exactly which version is true. That uncertainty is deliberate. The player is not simply a camera with hands. Their history is one of the final locked rooms in the story, and Chapter 5 makes that mystery more important by giving almost everybody else a human connection. The prototype has Oliver, Poppy has Elliot, CatNap has Theodore, Mommy has Marie, Dewey has Jack, Kevin, and Matthew. Lily has Gracie. The doctor has Harley Sawyer. As the monsters recover names, the person we control remains strangely unnamed. That reversal creates tension. At the beginning, the player seems human and the toys seem unknowable. By Chapter 5, we know more about the humanity inside the toys than we know about the human holding the grab pack. So the final question of identity may not belong to the prototype at all. It may belong to us. Who exactly returned to Playtime Co? And why did they survive the day everyone else was supposed to die? To answer that eventually, the story may have to return to the earliest experiments because Playtime Co. science is not just background lore anymore. By Chapter 5, it explains why characters who should be dead can return, why the prototype is so difficult to destroy, and why the factory's obsession with restoration became more dangerous than its obsession with toys. The path begins with a simple human desire. Elliot Ludwig loses someone he cannot accept losing. Everything that follows grows from the belief that death might be a technical problem. That belief is easy to sympathize with before we see what it becomes. A grieving parent does not need to be evil to ask whether life can be restored. The horror begins when the question becomes an institution. Once a company has money, laboratories, vulnerable subjects, and a reason to hide its failures, grief stops being private. It becomes research. Experiment 814 is important because it belongs to that earlier stage. The work with poppy flowers, organic material, and attempts to revive dead tissue suggests that Playtime Co. was searching for some way to return biological function after death. The details matter less than the direction. The company was not originally trying to make a blue security mascot 7 feet taller than a human. It was trying to cross the boundary between life and death. The toys came later. That changes the meaning of every successful bigger body. A living toy is not merely advanced robotics. It is evidence that Playtime Co. found a way to place human consciousness, human biological material, or both into forms that should not naturally live. Once that breakthrough exists, the company discovers a commercial use for it. This is one of the ugliest transformations in the entire timeline. A technology born from the desire to restore a loved one becomes a labor program. The question changes from, can we bring someone back? To how much payroll can we eliminate? Harley Sawyer's brilliance is not that he invents the dream. His brilliance is that he industrializes it. He sees what Playtime Co. has and removes the sentiment. A living toy does not have to be a miracle. It can be an employee. A child can become a test subject. A test subject can become a product. A product can perform a job. A job can be measured against operating cost. The language of resurrection becomes the language of efficiency. That is why Sawyer feels different from Elliot. Elliot's legacy is complicated by grief, secrecy, and the possibility that he convinced himself the work could save someone. Sawyer barely needs that justification. He wants results. He wants iteration. He wants scalable bodies. If one form fails, make another. If one subject proves unstable, collect the data. If a creature is useful, deploy it. If a mind resists, condition it. The Bigger Bodies initiative is terrifying because it transforms the impossible into workflow. And once resurrection becomes workflow, death loses its moral force inside the company. Why fear killing a subject if the body can be rebuilt? Why respect the limits of a child's identity if identity can be transferred? Why treat a person as irreplaceable if poppy gel can repair catastrophic damage? Chapter 5 pushes that question further than any earlier chapter. The prototype survives punishment that should end almost any living creature. Electricity, impact, fire, cold, collision, dismemberment, and years of physical alteration do not stop him in the way ordinary injury should. When the player is mortally wounded, the prototype does not simply leave the body behind. The player is placed into poppy gel. Then the impossible happens again. The player returns. That moment is more than a convenient revival mechanic. It confirms that the factory's oldest dream still functions. Death can be interrupted. A destroyed body may not be the end. But Poppy Playtime has spent 5 chapters showing us why that power is not salvation. Restoration and healing are not the same thing. To restore a body is to make it function. To heal a person is to return something that suffering took from them. Playtime Co. became very good at the first and catastrophically bad at the second. Theodore can be kept alive by becoming CatNap. That does not give Theodore his childhood back. Marie can survive inside Mommy Longlegs. That does not restore Marie's freedom. 3 children can continue inside Dewey. That does not make them whole. Oliver can become the prototype and regenerate beyond ordinary limits. That does not resolve the fact that he believes he was created as a replacement step in somebody else's family tragedy. Poppy herself can survive extraordinary damage. That does not erase what captivity and betrayal have done to her. This distinction may be the key to the title Broken Things. The factory is full of characters who have been physically repaired and emotionally destroyed. Playtime Co. looked at a broken body and asked how to make it useful again. Almost nobody asked what the person inside needed. The result is a population that can survive almost anything except its own history. Poppy gel is therefore both miracle and warning. In another story, regenerative material would be the cure everyone is trying to protect. Here, it is one of the reasons the nightmare can continue. The prototype can endure. Experiments can be rebuilt. The player can be returned to the board. Physical consequence becomes unstable while psychological consequence accumulates. A wound closes. A memory stays. That imbalance creates monsters who are incredibly difficult to kill and incredibly easy to hurt. It also explains the importance of the negation compound. If Poppy Gel represents the company's drive to restore, negation represents the opposite need, a way to stop what restoration has made unstoppable. The master backup holds knowledge capable of creating, modifying, and neutralizing. That language is crucial. By the time Playtime Co. reached its deepest stage, it did not merely know how to make life. It needed a method for undoing its own creations. Every sufficiently powerful technology in the factory seems to require a countermeasure because the company repeatedly creates things before deciding whether they should exist. The prototype is the ultimate version of that failure. He is called prototype because he was an early step. He becomes the greatest threat precisely because the early step was never safely contained. His body can change. He can incorporate material. He can survive damage. He can manipulate electronics and people. He understands the facility. He understands the family that created him, and the company knows enough about him to fear him without knowing enough to control him. That is why the master backup matters so much at the end of Chapter 5. The player is not reaching a treasure room. They are reaching the place where the corporation stored the memory of how its miracles work. Data becomes the last weapon. Not a bigger grab pack, not a stronger gun. Knowledge. This fits the structure of the entire series. Every chapter gives the player a mechanical upgrade, but the most important progress is informational. We learn a name, we hear a tape, we find a report, we discover who a voice really belongs to. We reinterpret an earlier scene. The physical puzzles open doors, the lore opens the story, and Chapter 5 ends by showing that stored knowledge can resurrect a threat just as easily as it can reveal one. The master backup does not simply provide a solution. It brings Harley Sawyer back into the conflict. The active version of the Doctor may have been defeated in Chapter 4, but a preserved version remains. That is perfectly consistent with the company's philosophy. Of course, the man who treated minds as transferable information would create a backup of himself. Of course, a corporation obsessed with defeating death would preserve the scientist who helped turn that obsession into industry. Sawyer's return is not a random cliffhanger. It is the company itself returning as a character. For most of the series, Playtime Co. is dead. Its employees are corpses. Its executives are recordings. Its procedures run automatically. Its crimes survive through architecture and experiments. The prototype rules the ruins because the humans who created him are gone. Then the master backup activates. Suddenly, the old institution has a voice again. That changes the balance of the story. The conflict is no longer only player against prototype. It is no longer only Poppy against Oliver. Now, one of the principal architects of the Bigger Bodies initiative can potentially speak, bargain, deceive, explain, and act. The revolution meets the scientist who helped make revolution necessary, and the player stands between them. This is why the Chapter 5 ending feels more like a door opening than a conclusion. The first 5 chapters answer the question of what happened to Playtime Co. They do not yet answer what should happen to what remains. Destroy it? Save the surviving experiments? Kill the prototype? Rescue Poppy? Trust Sawyer long enough to obtain the negation compound? Refuse both sides? Escape? Expose the truth to the outside world? Every option carries consequences because the factory is no longer empty. There are still people inside these bodies. There may still be children or transformed survivors whose status we do not fully understand. Destroying the building could end the system and kill its victims at the same time. Preserving it could preserve the system that created them. Poppy's Chapter 4 plan to destroy the factory becomes morally harder once Chapter 5 reminds us how many forms of life still move beneath it. That may be why the story keeps making survival messy. There is no clean reset button. Playtime Co. spent decades making sure of that. The factory's layout makes the same argument without saying a word. If we place chapters 1 through 5 beside each other, each major location represents a different stage in the process that created the disaster. Chapter 1 keeps us close to the showroom. The entrance is built for visitors. There are displays, branded characters, educational tapes, security doors disguised by cheerful design, and the enormous make-a-friend machinery. Everything is about manufacturing wonder. This is the Playtime Co. The public was supposed to remember. Even Huggy Wuggy initially appears as part of that display language. He stands in the center of the room like an icon. Before he becomes a predator, he is a mascot occupying the exact position a company would choose for its most recognizable product. Then he disappears. That one empty pedestal is the first crack in the public story. The product is alive. The building knows it. The visitor does not. From that point forward, Chapter 1 repeatedly forces us behind the presentation. Vents, catwalks, industrial rooms, conveyor belts. The farther we move from the entrance, the more obvious it becomes that the cute factory has another anatomy hidden behind its walls. Chapter 2 takes that anatomy and connects it to children. The game station looks playful because play is part of the experiment. Musical memory, Wuggy, and statues are presented like games, but each can be understood as measurement, memory, reaction, coordination, endurance, rule following, stress response. Children think they are competing. Adults can record data. That is a perfect Playtime Co system, because the subject experiences one activity while the institution extracts another. The child experiences play. The company experiences evaluation. This dual purpose appears everywhere. A toy can be a friend and a surveillance subject. An orphanage can be a home and a recruitment pool. A mascot can entertain children and perform security work. A train can transport visitors and move personnel through restricted infrastructure. Nothing has only one function. That is why Mommy Longlegs belongs in the game station. Marie Payne's surviving warmth toward children makes her useful as a host. Her hostility toward staff makes her dangerous to the people managing her. Instead of seeing that contradiction as evidence of a person responding rationally to abuse, the company sees a deployment problem. Put her where the children are. Keep the employees careful. Extract value. The game station becomes a place where personality itself is used as equipment. Chapter 3 descends into Playcare, and the mask comes off almost completely. This is not a recreation center attached to the factory. It is the human supply chain. Playtime Go needs children for testing. Playcare gives the company continuous access to children with limited outside protection. That does not mean every child who enters is automatically transformed. It means the institution has created the ideal environment for selecting subjects without exposing the process to the public. The children sleep there, they learn there, they play there, they are evaluated there. And CatNap's red smoke can make them unconscious. The separation between care and control becomes almost non-existent. The word Playcare is therefore one of the cruelest names in the series. The company combines play, the thing children choose, with care, the thing children should be able to trust. Then it turns both into mechanisms of access. CatNap embodies that corruption. A bedtime mascot should represent safety. A child closes their eyes because the adult world has made the room secure. CatNap reverses the meaning. Sleep becomes vulnerability. The gas that should gently support a bedtime theme becomes a tool capable of rendering an entire population helpless. And Theodore Grambell, once a child himself, becomes the creature administering that vulnerability. It is difficult to imagine a more complete example of Playtime Co forcing victims to reproduce the system that harmed them. Chapter 4 goes lower and shows us what happens when a subject no longer fits the smiling environment. The prison is not designed for customers. It does not need the same level of performance. Control becomes visible. Cells, surveillance, restricted movement, the doctor's systems, and the creatures kept inside reveal the machinery that the upper levels try to hide. Harley Sawyer is most at home here because the prison expresses his worldview. Bodies are manageable. Behavior is observable. Pain produces data. A subject who cannot leave can always be tested again. The doctor's transformation into an intelligence distributed through the facility makes the metaphor literal. Sawyer becomes the institution watching from the walls. He no longer needs to stand beside a clipboard. The prison itself becomes his nervous system. Then Safe Haven creates an alternative. Dewey and the survivors attempt something the company never intended the experiments to have: community without corporate purpose. Nobody needs to perform a mascot role there. Nobody needs to increase revenue. Nobody needs to entertain visitors. They are trying to live. That is why its destruction matters beyond the immediate deaths. Safe Haven is evidence that the experiments could build something other than the prototype's hierarchy or Playtime Co's hierarchy. It is imperfect. Dewey is unstable under enormous pressure. The community is vulnerable, but for a moment it proves that survivors can organize around protection rather than utility. The prototype destroys it indirectly. That choice tells us more about him than a direct attack would. He does not need to tear every wall apart with his own hands. He uses trust. He uses Ollie's voice. He turns Poppy and the player into parts of the sabotage. The method resembles Playtime Co. again. Manipulate people into operating the system for you. Let them believe they are solving a problem. Hide the real function until the consequence is irreversible. By Chapter 5, we reach the laboratories and data systems where the distinction between person, body, and information almost disappears. Here, the factory's deepest secrets are not represented by colorful mascots, but by processes, conditioning, regeneration, backups, negation, hybridization. The lower we go, the closer we get to the company's true product. It was never toys, it was controllable life. Toys were the interface, children were the resource, science was the mechanism, profit was the justification, and immortality was the dream hiding underneath all of it. This layered structure also explains why the player cannot simply walk back out after each revelation. Narratively, every answer pulls them deeper because every answer exposes a lower cause. Huggy is not the cause. Mommy is not the cause. CatNap is not the cause. The doctor is not the cause. Even the prototype is not the first cause. Each monster is another consequence. To understand why Huggy exists, we need the bigger bodies initiative. To understand the initiative, we need Sawyer and the company's economic pressure. To understand why living toys were possible, we need the resurrection experiments. To understand those experiments, we need Elliot and Poppy. To understand the prototype, we need Oliver and the fact that he was created in service of that same loss. The story moves downward because causality moves backward. Every basement contains an earlier decision. That is why Chapter 5 can reveal something about the beginning, while taking place at the deepest point we have reached. Physically, the player is moving forward. Historically, they are approaching the origin. The same pattern appears in the monsters. Huggy looks simple in Chapter 1 because we know nothing about him. By Chapter 5, seeing Huggy again carries 4 chapters of context. He is no longer just the thing that chased us through event. He is Experiment 1170. He was security. He survived. He has his own relationships. He can be frightened, enraged, manipulated, and calmed. His connection with Kissy gives him emotional context the first chapter intentionally denied us. The monster acquires a biography. Kissy undergoes the opposite transformation. When she first appears, her kindness is shocking because the game has trained us to expect every large toy to attack. She pulls a lever and leaves. That tiny act creates trust before we know why. Later chapters complicate that trust with danger, injury, loyalty, and finally her interaction with Huggy. When Kissy calms him in Chapter 5, the scene does not require a speech. The important thing is that somebody can reach him. The blue predator who spent the first game functioning like pure hunger responds to a relationship. That is another blow against Playtime Co.'s numbering system. 1000 VIX 70 is not a machine state. There is still somebody in there who recognizes somebody else. The prototype understands this too. That is why impaling Huggy and Kissy together feels targeted. Whether they are ultimately dead or not, the act attacks connection. He interrupts the moment in which two creatures begin acting outside his control. The prototype repeatedly claims bodies. Kissy repeatedly creates bonds. That contrast may become important later. Kissy does not need to explain a political philosophy to represent another possible future for the experiments. Her actions already do it. Help someone, open a path, protect Poppy, reach Huggy, risk yourself. These are small choices compared with a revolution. They may be exactly what the revolution forgot. The importance of connection becomes even clearer when we look at the way Playtime Co. handled children before those children ever became experiments. The company did not begin by changing bodies. It learned how to shape behavior. The game station tested what children could do. The conditioning material associated with Gracie shows a darker step, teaching a child how to understand who they are. That distinction matters. A reflex test asks whether you can respond. Conditioning asks what response should feel normal. If a child can be trained to accept a name, a role, a routine, or a fictional identity, then physical transformation becomes easier to conceal inside psychological transformation. The body becomes a toy. The mind is encouraged to become the character. This helps explain why the experiments display such complicated relationships with their mascot identities. Some cling to the role. Some resent it. Some seem to move between human memory and toy behavior. Some fracture. Some create entirely new identities. Lily Lovebraids makes that process impossible to ignore. The horror surrounding Lily and Gracie is not simply that a human became something else. It is that identity itself appears to have been worked on. The cheerful performance of a toy persona becomes a layer placed over trauma. When the player encounters the result, it is difficult to separate what was taught, what was remembered, what was invented for survival, and what the experiment now genuinely believes. That ambiguity is not a flaw in the lore, it is the outcome Playtime Co created. If you repeatedly tell a child that the character is who they are, then put that child into the character's body. Where exactly should the old identity end? The company treated that question as something useful. The story treats it as violence. Dewey gives us another version. There's no single human past waiting beneath the mascot. There are multiple children. Jack, Kevin, and Matthew do not merge into a perfectly harmonious new person. Their different emotional responses remain capable of surfacing under stress. Dewey can be kind because part of his internal life wants to protect. He can reason because part of him seeks control. He can become violently unstable because grief and rage inside him do not disappear, simply because the company assigned one experiment number to the combined result. The bigger body is singular from the outside. The suffering inside it is plural. That is why Dewey's collapse after Safe Haven is destroyed feels so different from a normal boss transformation. We are not watching a villain reveal his true form. We are watching a coping structure fail. The personalities that allowed Dewey to function as one protector can no longer agree on what the loss means. Reason says one thing, grief says another. Rage demands someone to blame. The player becomes the nearest target for a tragedy the prototype engineered. Dewey's final apology matters because it confirms that the violent state was not the whole person. The story allows contradiction to survive until the end. He can attack us and still care. He can be dangerous and still be a victim. He can make a terrible choice without retroactively making every kind thing meaningless. That complexity is essential to understanding Poppy Playtime's experiments. The game repeatedly asks us not to confuse danger with evil. Huggy is dangerous. Mommy is dangerous. CatNap is dangerous. Dewey is dangerous. The prototype is dangerous. But the reasons are different. If every monster were simply insane because science went wrong, the lore would be much smaller. Instead, the games keep giving them histories that explain different responses to the same institution. Marie becomes protective toward children and hateful toward staff. Theodore becomes devoted to the being who once saved him. Dewey tries to build refuge. Kissy helps. Huggy seems to move between predation and attachment. Oliver turns survival into domination. The shared origin does not produce a shared morality. That point matters because it preserves responsibility. Trauma can explain the prototype without excusing him. If every experiment were destined to become like him, then his actions would merely be programming. But Kissy exists. Dewey's safe haven exists. DogDay's resistance exists. Poppy's opposition exists. Different choices remain possible. The prototype suffered. Then he chose what to build from that suffering. Playtime Co gave him the materials. It did not write every decision he would ever make. This is also why CatNap's devotion is tragic rather than simple brainwashing. Theodore has a reason to see 1006 as a savior. Before CatNap existed, the prototype chose to help the injured boy. He sacrificed an opportunity to escape in order to bring Theodore to people who could keep him alive. From Theodore's perspective, that act could become the defining event of his life. Then the company transforms him. The person associated with salvation is no longer a distant memory. He is another prisoner, another experiment, eventually a revolutionary leader. CatNap's worship grows from gratitude that the company can never deserve. But gratitude becomes absolute loyalty. Absolute loyalty becomes religion. Religion becomes permission to punish anybody labeled a heretic. DogDay shows the endpoint. He is not tortured because he serves Playtime Co. He is tortured because he refuses the prototype. The revolution has developed its own orthodoxy. Once again, the old system survives inside the new one. Playtime Co. punished disobedience to corporate authority. CatNap punishes disobedience to the prototype. Different god, same cage. This pattern makes Oliver's behavior toward Poppy especially revealing. He does not merely want her dead. If killing Poppy were the goal, Chapter 5 gives him opportunities. Instead, the relationship is possessive, angry, intimate, and unresolved. Poppy represents the purpose around which his creation was organized. She is the reason he believes he was treated as a prototype rather than as Oliver. She is simultaneously family, grievance, proof, and obsession. He can hate what she represents while still wanting control over her. That is why the family revelation matters more than a simple villain twist. It gives the entire conflict an emotional architecture. Elliot tries to defeat loss. Oliver becomes part of the attempt. Poppy becomes the person restored. Oliver decides his original identity is dead. Years later, the restored daughter and discarded prototype are still trapped inside the consequences of Elliot's refusal to accept death. The factory is their inheritance. The Hour of Joy is part of that inheritance. The experiments are part of that inheritance. The player walks into what is, at the deepest level, a family tragedy expanded until thousands of people are caught inside it. That does not mean Elliot personally planned every horror that followed. It means the foundational dream matters. Once you declare that death is unacceptable at any cost, every ethical boundary becomes negotiable. Try another subject. Try another body. Try another chemical. Hide another failure. Build another lab. Adopt another child. Call him a prototype. Restore her. Keep going. A company can turn one person's inability to let go into policy. Harley Sawyer later transforms that policy into mass production. The prototype transforms it into his own form of permanence. Everybody inherits the same command. Do not let the thing end. That may be the deepest curse in Poppy playtime. Nobody is allowed to finish. The dead return, the injured regenerate, the corporation survives as data, the prototype survives destruction, the experiments survive inside bodies they never chose, old identities survive inside new mascots, guilt survives in the player, even the factory survives the death of its workforce. Poppy Playtime is a story about preservation becoming grotesque. The company preserves life without dignity. The prototype preserves a society without freedom. The master backup preserves a scientist who should have become history. The building preserves every crime in abandoned rooms. The player preserves the investigation by refusing to leave. The question is not whether something can be saved. The question is whether saving it is always mercy. That question hangs over every unresolved mystery at the end of Chapter 5. Start with Huggy and Kissy. The prototype impales them in a scene designed to look final. But Poppy Playtime has taught us to be careful with bodies. Huggy already survived the fall at the end of Chapter 1. The prototype survives damage that would destroy almost anything else. Poppy Gel can return a mortally wounded player. And when the story later denies us a simple, permanent body to inspect, certainty becomes even harder. So the safest conclusion is not that Huggy and Kissy definitely live or definitely die. The conclusion is that the prototype wanted them removed. That intention matters even if the physical outcome remains open. Huggy had broken away from the role the prototype expected. Kissy had become one of Poppy's closest protectors. Their brief reconciliation created a partnership that did not answer to him. If they survive, they represent a possible alliance powerful enough to matter. If they die, their deaths demonstrate what the prototype destroys when he cannot control it. Either way, the scene is about independence. Then there is Poppy. By the end of Chapter 5, she is no longer simply the tiny doll who gave the series its name. Her personal history sits at the center of the entire experiment program. Her body is tied to the success of the Resurrection Project. Her family history is tied to Elliot. Her relationship with Oliver is tied to the prototype. Her imprisonment is tied to the aftermath of the Hour of Joy. Her plan is tied to the possible destruction of the factory. And now the prototype has her again. This is one of the most dangerous positions the story could leave her in, because she is simultaneously a hostage and a piece of the prototype's origin. He knows what she is. She now understands more clearly what he is. Whatever happens between them next cannot be reduced to hero and villain meeting for a final boss fight. They share history that predates the massacre. The player may need to enter a conflict that began before most of the bigger bodies existed. Then there is Sawyer. His return changes what information can become available. For years, the story has forced us to reconstruct Playtime Co. from fragments because the people who knew the truth were dead, missing, transformed, or lying. A surviving backup of Harley Sawyer can potentially answer questions directly. That does not mean we should trust his answers. In fact, Sawyer may be most dangerous when he is telling the truth. He understands the initiative. He understands the experiments. He understands the prototype. He may understand the negation compound. He may understand the player, and unlike a recording, he can choose which truth to reveal at which moment. The difference between an archive and a person is strategy. A tape cannot negotiate. Sawyer can. That creates a new kind of threat for the next stage of the story. The player has spent 5 chapters surviving creatures that attack the body. Sawyer can attack the interpretation of everything we think we know. He can offer context. He can identify old employees. He can explain why particular subjects were chosen. He can tell us what happened on days the tapes never recorded, and because he participated in the system, every revelation can also be manipulation. The information we need may come from somebody we have every reason to That is much more interesting than simply finding another document. The prototype also wants access to control and knowledge. The master backup represents something he cannot ignore. If negation can neutralize what Playtime Co. created, then it may be one of the few mechanisms capable of threatening his regenerative advantage. That means the final conflict could revolve around a technology designed by the same institution that caused the problem. Again, there is no clean moral tool. Using Playtime Co.'s science to destroy the prototype may be necessary. Using it may also mean activating systems that were never ethical in the first place. The player repeatedly wins by operating machinery built for terrible purposes. The grab pack was not made for heroism. Industrial grinders were not built as weapons against mommy. Gas systems were not created to free children. The factory's infrastructure becomes useful because survival repurposes it. Negation may become the largest version of that pattern. Take the tool of the oppressor and decide what it should mean now. But before any final answer, the story still owes us the player. The unnamed former employee has become increasingly strange through absence. Why were they not present during the hour of joy? What exactly did they do at Playtime Co? How much did they know? Why can they move through restricted systems with such persistence? Why are certain characters interested in their survival rather than simply killing them immediately? Was the opening letter truly sent by someone trying to rescue them, or was returning to the factory itself part of a plan? Who benefits from the player being here? Poppy benefits because the player opens her case. Mommy uses the player as a participant in her games. The prototype benefits from the player destabilizing enemies and moving through systems he wants changed. Ollie manipulates the player into actions that ultimately help destroy Safe Haven. The doctor studies and attacks them. By Chapter 5, the player has become one of the most effective forces inside the facility despite entering with almost no apparent plan beyond investigating the disappearance. That cannot remain narratively neutral forever. The factory has turned the player into an agent. The final reveal may be whether that agency is genuinely theirs. There is another clue in the repeated command to get up. After catastrophic moments, the player's persistence exceeds what an ordinary former employee should reasonably endure. Some of that is simply game structure. A horror protagonist has to survive, but Chapter 5's use of poppy gel makes the body's resilience part of the lore. Once revival technology becomes explicit, previous assumptions about the player become less stable. Are they completely ordinary? Have they been altered? Did something happen before the opening of Chapter 1? Does somebody understand their body better than they do? The story has not provided enough information to state an answer. That is precisely why the question now matters. Chapter 5 removes one mystery by humanizing the prototype and immediately makes the player's lack of identity more conspicuous. If the final story reveals that the player also has a direct connection to the experiment program, it would not come from nowhere. If the player remains an ordinary employee, that would be meaningful too. An ordinary person surviving among engineered monsters would reinforce the importance of choices over design. Either possibility can work. What matters is that the story eventually resolves the silence. The fate of the orphans is equally important. The hour of joy is usually described through the deaths of Playtime Co staff, but the children complicate the event. The prototype presents one version of what happened. Poppy reacts with horror. The factory provides fragments rather than a complete census. Chapter 5 adds information without giving us the comfort of seeing every child's fate. That uncertainty should not be filled with invented certainty. What we can say is that the orphans were central to the system before the massacre and central to the moral consequences afterward. They were not background decoration, they were subjects, potential experiments, witnesses, victims of adults who transformed care into access. Whatever the prototype did with them after taking control will define whether his claim of liberation ever had substance. If he protected some, that complicates him. If he sacrificed them, it condemns his revolution further. If different groups suffered different outcomes, that would fit the messy reality the games have established. The same caution applies to the prototype's ultimate goal. Destroying Playtime Co. is no longer enough to explain him. The company is already dead as a functioning corporation. He has controlled the ruins for years, yet he continues experimenting, collecting, manipulating, and pursuing Poppy. A revolutionary whose revolution succeeded should eventually decide what peace looks like. The prototype never seems able to. He remains organized around conflict. That suggests his goal is no longer freedom from Playtime Co. It is completion. But completion of what? A perfect body? A family restored on his terms? a society completely under his authority? Escape into the outside world? Control over the resurrection technology? The elimination of anyone capable of negating him? The exact answer remains open. What Chapter 5 gives us is the emotional core. Oliver believes he was a prototype made for somebody else. A prototype is, by definition, unfinished. If he internalized that word deeply enough to replace his own name with it, perhaps being unfinished is not merely a description. It is the wound around which his entire identity formed. That would explain the endless addition of parts, the bodies collected, the changing form, the experiments, the refusal to stop. A being who thinks of himself as a prototype may spend forever trying to become the final version. And no final version can repair the childhood in which he learned he was not the intended result. That is why physical victory alone may not resolve the story. You can destroy a machine. It is harder to destroy the idea that created it. Playtime Co. believed people could be improved until they became useful products. The prototype may believe he can improve himself until he becomes impossible to discard. Both chase an endpoint that keeps moving. Both leave broken things behind. And this is where the story of chapters 1 through 5 finally becomes one continuous chain instead of 5 separate horror games. A grieving founder refuses to accept loss. Research intended to restore life proves that the boundary of death can be manipulated. The company discovers that living toys are possible. Sawyer recognizes that possibility as an industrial system. Children inside Playcare become convenient subjects for testing and transformation. The Bigger Bodies initiative produces creatures designed to perform jobs while hiding the human cost inside mascot bodies. Oliver becomes the prototype, an early experiment connected to Elliot's attempt to restore Poppy. Theodore becomes CatNap. Marie becomes Mommy Longlegs. Other subjects become Huggy, Kissy, Dewey, and the growing population beneath the factory. The experiments learn what they are. The prototype organizes the hour of joy. Playtime Co. collapses in a single day of coordinated violence, but the factory does not become free. It becomes isolated. The prototype gains authority. Poppy opposes what he has done and is locked away. Years pass. Then one former employee receives a message claiming the missing workers are still inside. The player returns. They wake Poppy. Mommy tries to prevent their escape and dies. The prototype takes her body. Poppy sends the player deeper because leaving would mean abandoning everyone still trapped below. In Playcare, CatNap turns the prototype into religion and dies at the hand of the being he worshipped. The player finally witnesses the hour of joy instead of merely hearing rumors about it. In the prison and safe haven, the doctor reveals another surviving layer of the old company while Dewey reveals that the experiments can still build community. The prototype, speaking through Ollie, destroys that community without exposing himself. Dewey breaks under the loss. Kissy is maimed. The player falls into the labs. Huggy returns. Chapter 5 strips away the remaining distance. The prototype is no longer only a claw seen collecting corpses. He is Oliver. Poppy is no longer only the doll at the beginning of the mystery. She is bound to the family and science that created the mystery. The laboratories reveal how identity was conditioned, how bodies could be restored, and how Playtime Co. planned for its own creations to be neutralized. Huggy and Kissy briefly show that old monsters can form new loyalties. The prototype tears that possibility apart. He takes Poppy, the player dies, and returns through the same regenerative science that made the factory's impossible history possible. Then the master backup awakens. Sawyer speaks again. That is where the story currently stops, and it is the right place to stop because almost every layer of the original mystery has now been inverted. In Chapter 1, we entered because we wanted to know where the employees went. Now we know the better question was what Playtime Co. did before they disappeared. In Chapter 1, Huggy looked like the central monster. Now he looks like one victim among many. In Chapter 2, the prototype looked like a mysterious scavenger collecting dead experiments. Now we know he has a human history connected directly to Poppy. In Chapter 3, Ollie looked like a distant ally helping us navigate Playcare. Now his voice is inseparable from one of the prototype's most effective deceptions. In Chapter 4, destroying the factory looked like a possible solution. Now the regenerative technology, surviving experiments, master backup, and Poppy's capture make destruction far more complicated. In Chapter 5, even death stops being a reliable endpoint. The mystery has evolved from where is everyone to what counts as a person after Playtime Co. has changed the body, copied the mind, erased the name, and taught the survivor to answer to something else. That is the question underneath every mascot. It is also the question underneath the player. Playtime Co. spent decades insisting that identity could be engineered. The story keeps proving that identity fights back. Marie still matters inside Mommy. Theodore still matters inside CatNap. Jack, Kevin, and Matthew still matter inside Dewey. Gracie matters to the horror of Lily. Oliver matters inside the prototype even after he rejects the name. Poppy's past matters no matter how perfectly her body can be repaired. And if Huggy and Kissy return again, what matters most will not be whether their bodies survived an impalement. It will be what they choose to do with the lives left inside them. That is why the human names are the most dangerous pieces of lore in the series. A monster name can make violence feel simple. A human name restores context. Once the context returns, the factory cannot hide behind the word experiment. There were people here, children here, families here, choices here. The cheerful mascots were never the true secret. The secret was how easily an institution convinced itself that a person could become a resource if the paperwork used the right number. And the prototype's great failure is that he never completely escapes that lesson. He hates the company that turned people into things, yet he collects bodies as components. He hates being treated as an unfinished step, yet he decides what other survivors are allowed to become. He destroys the old hierarchy, then places himself above the ruins. He understands the pain of being owned and still tries to possess Poppy. That contradiction is more important than how many limbs his final form has. It is the reason defeating him matters. Not because he is the biggest creature in the factory, because he has become the continuation of the idea the factory was built around. Control the body, control the identity, control the future. Poppy's resistance matters for the opposite reason. She is not perfect. She has manipulated the player and made decisions that place others in danger. But she repeatedly insists that what happened inside Playtime Co. cannot simply be accepted as the natural order of things. The company does not deserve to continue because it created miracles. The prototype does not deserve to rule because he overthrew the company. Survival alone does not create moral authority. Power alone does not make a family. And escaping the factory means finally deciding who every life belongs to.